Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we're talking the 1987 Best Actress race at the Academy Awards, where Cher won for her performance in Moonstruck. But why did she beat fellow nominees Glenn Close, Holly Hunter, Sally Kirkland, and Meryl Streep? We'll explore all this and more today on And the Runner-Up Is. Hello and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, here to talk about the 60th year of Best Actress at the Oscars, which covered the films of 1987. We'll be discussing how Cher won, why the losers lost, and who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. And my guest today is a guy who's been on this show quite a few times, and not just because he knows the host really well. You've heard him on the Best Picture series, some bonus episodes, including when we talked about It's a Wonderful Life last year. He also was the very first guest introducing this whole Best Actress series. My partner, Best Supporting Actor, partner in crime, it's Sebastian Gronback.
Hello, I'm here on the show. I'm prepared to talk about a great and very interesting year of Best Actress.
I'm excited to have you on to talk about a iconic lineup, I must say.
Yeah, this feels kind of like a big deal.
Yeah. Well, before we talk 1987, let's talk Best Actress as a category. So, as you reminded me before we started, because I forgot, I asked you in the Best Actress introduction episode way back in 2021, I think, who your favorite Best Actress wins were, and you gave me three. You said Julia Roberts and Erin Brockovich, Cher in Moonstruck.
Wow, look at that.
And Natalie Portman in Black Swan. So my alternate question for you here is, what would you say is your favorite Best Actress lineup of all time?
So I was looking at the list, and something that popped out to me, and a year that I like because I like a lot of the films in this year, is the 59 year with Doris Day in Pillow Talk, Audrey Hepburn in A Nun Story, which I haven't seen,
Okay.
Katharine Hepburn and Liz Taylor in Suddenly Last Summer, and Simone Signoret in Room at the Top. I really like the performances in this year, and I really like how varied they are. I really like the Doris Day and Pillow Talk nomination because it's not one that you get a lot. They don't do a lot of just straight up comedies very often.
Yeah.
And I also really like Suddenly Last Summer, a film that is like, I feel like high camp.
Katharine Hepburn's entrance alone.
Absolutely. I mean, like, you really can't deny Katharine Hepburn both arriving and leaving the film in an elevator.
Yes. Hasn't been done since. Yeah, we had a really fun time talking about that lineup, me and Chris File. One of those lineups where it feels like this is just like a cross-section of all of the great stars, past and present at that time. Katharine Hepburn, Audrey Hepburn, Doris Day getting her only nomination. And then, Simone Signoret, the least known of the five, winning over all of them. Love that pick. Well, my other question for you, you listed three heartbreaking losses as well, which were Glenn Close in Dangerous Liaisons. Very good. Anne Hathaway in Rachel Getting Married, and Cate Blanchett in Carol. So my alternate question here is, opening it up to all lead actress performances, what would you rate as your most heartbreaking snub of all time?
This one it's pretty basic. I think it's brought up all the time, but it's still, for me personally, the most baffling snub of the last 30 years, and it's Amy Adams in Arrival. Yeah. I still, for the life of me, cannot understand why she wasn't nominated outside of just having a grudge against Amy Adams.
Well, I think personally, we kind of got into this when we talked about her on A Woman Robbed, sci-fi bias, muted performance. I think there are kind of surface level things that you can say about it as to why she didn't get in, but yeah, it's very glaring still all these years later now when you look at all of the nominations Arrival got and you don't nominate the heart and soul of the movie. It makes you wonder if they actually appreciated it at all.
Yeah, exactly. It's still baffling. And if I could get like the answer to one great question, it would just be, why was she not nominated?
Mm-hmm.
So who knows?
Yeah, but we had to nominate Meryl for singing badly.
I'm sure we'll touch upon that a little bit later.
Yes, certainly. All right. Well, let's talk about this year at the Oscars, the 60th Academy Awards. The nominees were Cher in Moonstruck, Glenn Close in Fatal Attraction, Holly Hunter in Broadcast News, Sally Kirkland in Anna, and Meryl Streep in Ironweed, with the winner being the one and only Cher. So before we break down these performances individually, what would you say are your overall thoughts on this lineup?
This lineup is a great lineup for me. I think there's some performances in here that are pretty much just like the blueprint. Like there are some performances here where, like, if you don't get these performances, you don't get some Oscar nominated and even Emmy nominated performances later on, like 20, 30 years down the road. And I think a lot of these are iconic. I think they come from great screenwriters, great directors, and I really like the stuff of James L. Brooks. Terms of Endearment is one of my favorite Best Picture winners, so I'm excited to get to talk about Broadcast News.
Yes, this is a fantastic lineup and one that I've been really looking forward to since I first came up with the idea to do Best Actress as a series. First of all, most importantly, this is my first opportunity to fully go in depth about Glenn Close.
I feel like I'm here for a momentous occasion.
Yes, it's what we've all been waiting for. Maybe not all. Some of you out there have been waiting for. And for one of her most defining performances, we have the one and only Cher, like I said, her big win here that feels like such a stars aligning moment for her. We have Holly Hunter getting her big breakthrough in a movie I also love. Sally Kirkland and her incredible grassroots campaign, Little Engine That Could, getting this tiny little independent film all the way to a Best Actress nomination. And of course, we have Meryl, who, when Meryl is your least exciting performance at this stage in her career, then you've got something pretty good. I think this is a group that, on the whole, has held up pretty spectacularly. Lots of big names, lots of good stories, and it's another really just interesting snapshot of the roles for women in the 80s, and I think we'll probably have a good discussion talking about the sort of diversity of characters here, which is nice because the 80s can feel a little homogenized at times, but this is a fun buzzy group.
When you go through just a history of Best Actress, especially coming up into the 90s, there's a lot of performances that are nominated that are kind of forgotten to time. Things that come and go and really just stick out in just the year. This is the year where there's at minimum 3 performances that people still talk about today. So
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And 3 Best Picture nominees. That doesn't always happen. So good crossover. So shall we get started?
Yeah, let's get started.
Okay. Well, we are starting here with the woman of the hour, in my opinion, Glenn Close in Fatal Attraction. So this is the moment we finally are here at Glenn Close's first lead nomination for Fatal Attraction. And this is
the first of how many?
First lead of 4, because she's 4 supporting, 4 lead, so 8 in total.
Oof.
Yeah. This is one of the many introductions for this episode who hasn't been nominated before in this category. So Glenn was born in Greenwich, Connecticut. She has a very fascinating background where her parents joined what turned out to be a cult when she was 7 years old, and they were kind of stuck in that for 15 years. And she finally left at the age of 22, and she went on to become a singer for this nonprofit group. And eventually she attended the College of William and Mary, where she studied theater and anthropology. She did some theater and some TV movies in the 70s. And then she had her big breakthrough in 1982 when she made her film debut in The World According to Garp as the mother of Robin Williams' character, and she got an Oscar nomination in Best Supporting Actress. The next year, she was in The Big Chill, which was a big hit and got her second nomination in supporting. And then the following year, she was working with Robert Redford in The Natural and got in for a third year in a row in supporting. And that's kind of a nomination that she herself thinks was probably not entirely because of her performance so much as, you know, the cinematographer lighting her well, but that's another story. After that, she wins a Tony, and she sort of tries to break out of what she feared she was being typecast as, which was the Earth Mother, and she wasn't really interested in playing those kinds of mom roles. So she took on some bigger, more challenging material with things like Maxie and Jagged Edge, which is kind of a precursor to Fatal Attraction here, but it's really this movie that propelled her to basically the stratosphere with this immediately iconic role. So Fatal Attraction, it's an erotic thriller, and there were some fears that Glenn wasn't sexy enough to play this role, but she was very insistent and made it very clear how much she wanted it. Other people who were considered for the part were Barbara Hershey, Isabella Gianni, Deborah Winger, Susan Sarandon, Jessica Lange, Melanie Griffith, Michelle Pfeiffer, and Ellen Barkin. But Glenn really, really pursued it and made it happen for herself. So Fatal Attraction is the story of a family man, Dan Gallagher, who seems to have a happy life with his wife and daughter in New York City. He's a lawyer, and then one day at a party, he meets Alex Forrest, played by Glenn, a book editor, and the two get to know each other and eventually have a one-night stand, and she becomes very attached to him almost right away after that and becomes obsessive about seeing him again, and she takes several drastic actions to get his attention again, including harming herself, maneuvering herself into his life, and all basically in the hopes that he will leave his wife and that they can live happily together. But Dan becomes increasingly terrified by her. So let's talk Miss Glenn Close, 8-time Academy Award nominee Glenn Close. What is your relationship with Glenn, and what do you think of her in what is still probably her most iconic role?
Well, my relationship with Glenn is not nearly as like tremendous as your relationship with Glenn. Most of my stuff with Glenn is through you, and I'm sure I'm going to be watching more of her performances as we go on through the rest of the series, watching the rest of her lead nomination performances. Mm-hmm. I do want to say, I think this is my favorite Glenn Close performance of all that I've seen from her. I mean, like, you know, you grow up and you see like 101 Dalmatians and stuff like that. Obviously, like a very iconic performance for her. But this is a real big deal. This is one of the most iconic films of the entire decade. And it's all anchored by Glenn Close. And it's directed by Adrian Lyne, king of horny cinema. And the thing that I really noted while watching this film and watching it in context with the rest of the 80s is the visceral physicality of this performance, which is so unlike a lot of the other more conservative Best Actress nominations of the decade. The idea that Glenn Close couldn't pull off an erotic role like this prior to making the film seems kind of crazy, because when you see her in this film, she is going for it like 110%. And I really, really like that. I think this is a great film.
Do you think that it holds up? Because many have said that it's of its time.
It is a great film of the 80s.
Yeah.
I think. I don't know if it like quote unquote holds up to today's standards, but I think that without this film, there are films later on that we don't get. because we just watched Gone Girl last night with Rosamund Pike. And I think that performance owes so much to this performance here.
Yes, totally. And obviously in the movies that came out shortly after Fatal Attraction, like Basic Instinct, Sharon Stone in that movie kind of owes a bit to Glenn here, perhaps.
Yeah, I would say so.
Ways. Yeah. So as many people know, Glenn Close is my actress. She's someone who I've loved since I was a kid, being scared but also kind of riveted at the same time by her as Cruella in 101 Dalmatians. And from there, just watching so much of her work. Damages was another one that was big for me, but then all of her great film work in this, Dangerous Liaisons, Reversal of Fortune, Mars Attacks, even movies that aren't particularly loved, like The Stepford Wives. I think what I love about Glenn is that she has such an intelligence with how she plays her roles. She always kind of does her homework, and it allows her to make some big choices and not have them feel too artificial. And, you know, those choices, like some she makes in Fatal Attraction, are usually rooted in some kind of underlying feeling that she's able to express with her character and inner life, I guess. And I just always feel a connection with her because of that. And the other thing I love is that she is a lot like Bette Davis in not being afraid to play dark and villainous characters, and it doesn't feel like she's desperate for her characters to be liked. And she really kind of excels in that tension of being sort of complicated and not always easy to root for, but finding a humanity at the same time. And that's exactly what I think she does in Fatal Attraction to pretty perfect effect. I think this character of Alex, I think, could be a total cartoon villain, and there are plenty of actresses who could have played it that way based on the script and have played it that way maybe in other erotic thrillers. Or it could go the other way too, of making Alex seem kind of weak and kind of pathetic in those attempts to get this guy's attention. But I think Glenn really rides the line really perfectly of being someone who seems very capable and very good at her job, and someone you could like hang around with even at the start of the movie and having like intelligent conversations. But then once they get too attached, it's like all of that intelligence is kind of channeled into something very dangerous. And I feel like despite how the movie ultimately handles her as a character, she does have a thoughtful way of maintaining the humanity of Alex and showing that deep pain that she's in.
What I love about this performance, and you really noted it too, is how like it would be very easy for another actress to just go all in and just go on the like quote unquote crazy elements like harder than anything else. Mm-hmm. But what I really like here is that on top of all the big physical scenes that she has, there's so much great facial acting from Glenn Close in this movie. She can just like not say a word or just say like a few words at all, but you can see exactly in her face what she's thinking at any given time. Mm-hmm. It's really, really impressive. The work that she does here with Michael Douglas is really good. I think they're paired well here together. Just as like a sidebar, I want to do just about Michael Douglas and his character in this movie. Mm-hmm. We do need to just really just like on the whole establish the fact that all of the events of this film are his fault, right?
Yes, correct.
Yes, mm-hmm. He is a real grade A dum-dum. Mm-hmm. I feel like in a common trope of people in the 80s, and I think something that would kind of maybe come up in Wall Street, he's a guy that has everything he wants and is still not satisfied. And then when things don't go his way, it's all someone else's fault. Mm-hmm. But even still, you know, people categorize Alex Forrest as like one of the great like villains of cinema. We have this talk like every few years. And I really don't think she's like a villain here. I think she makes a lot of bad choices, just generally, just like as a person.
Mm-hmm. She does boil a bunny.
She does take the kid's rabbit throw it in a pot.
Mm-hmm.
Does take a child on a roller coaster. You were talking about how like, oh, that's me and my relationship with Glenn Close.
Yes,
You're
correct.
you're the little baby on the roller coaster.
Yes.
But it's very clear that there are things mentally wrong with Alex Forrest
Mm-hmm.
that I think are somewhat out of her control.
Yes. Yeah.
I think a lot of this with Alex Forrest could have been solved with a good therapist and maybe some medication, but it all begins with Michael Douglas just making very poor decisions.
This is very true. And
Mm-hmm.
Glenn also has an interesting quote about the character and how she found her way into it. She said, I think she was victimized as a child. Her behavior indicates that, with the result that she's emotionally crippled because she's very intelligent. She's been able to cope up to now, but all the elements for a crack up are there. I don't think any human being is black or white. We're all very complicated creatures, and Alex is a person in great pain.
I absolutely agree with that. Yeah. That I mean, like, obviously she's the one that put so much into the role, so she
Yeah.
knows best. But I absolutely agree with that. That's very true. I think she's not a full-throated psycho villain like it's like she's been labeled as for
Mm-hmm.
the past several decades. I think she's a tragic villain here.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And if you look at the original ending, which we'll probably talk about, that tragedy is present and feels like the more honest version of this story, but we'll get to that.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk about how she kind of establishes things before she goes off the deep end, as it were. When she's actually talking to Dan, I noticed that she has this softness, and it's like she's kind of perpetually smiling too, and it creates this effect that's a little unsettling, the way she stares at him a little too long. But there's also something at the same time, again, in the beginning at least, kind of welcoming and knowing about her, like she's a cool girl in a way, kind of lightly prodding him, saying like, better run along to meet up with your wife, and she's kind of like exotic in the way that would make a guy like Dan so attracted to her at first. You have to kind of believe that he would fall for her. And yeah, I do think they have this kind of easy rapport between them that easily draws them to each other. They're two passionate people about their work and everything. I also think just the way that she's styled, like the curly blonde hair and the kind of shoulder pad white costume, there's something almost animalistic going on there, very predator feeling. But at the same time, you can kind of see it as her just trying to establish herself as a dominant force in the workplace, not even considering anything that she's about to do to Dan. She is someone who is trying to be an equal, in the 80s corporate world.
Yeah, that's certainly what a big part of the 80s was, is women really trying to establish themselves equally on equal ground. And you can tell that Alex puts a lot of work into trying to match up to the people around her.
Yes, for sure. And also the conversation at the restaurant, which I kind of call like the seduction scene, is such a fantastic scene for her, the way she toys with him, like asking him if he's discreet and having this very seductive tone in her voice. She knows what she wants, and she knows what works on guys like this, and her like staring at him. It's this great feeling of kind of sultry and scary, like she's luring him to sleep with her, which obviously works like a charm. She was actually given the direction to play footsie with Michael Douglas in that scene and not to tell him about that in advance, which I think really works for the awkward sort of, tension between them. But that specific look she gives, it's almost like a Kubrickian stare. That it actually reminds me of a similar look that Bette Davis has in Of Human Bondage, where it's like you just know that this woman is gonna get whatever she wants, and you're kind of scared, but you're also kind of morbidly curious at the same time. So I think she does lay the groundwork well.
It's definitely a look that to Michael Douglas maybe doesn't mean too much, but to the audience watching the film, you can tell like, oh, it's already too late. She's already got him in the trap at this point.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what I find so interesting about just the performance and the perspective of the film is that she does just represent so much of the fears of the time for insecure men, which is, like we were kind of saying, the rise of women in corporate positions in the workplace, women who are aggressive, and ultimately women who threaten the nuclear family. And all of that baggage, I think, is interesting to look back on and sort of recognize how some things have changed, some have stayed the same, but also how she is just very clearly investing in this character outside of that. And I would say fighting against some of the more sexist elements of the films and fighting to give some humanity to Alex and showing her loneliness and her desperation to be loved and feeling like she is having to sort of bear the burden of this affair when he just gets to have it both ways. He gets to go home to his wife and be happy either way, and that's not fair to her. You know, they both kind of know what they're doing, but only one of them is vilified for it.
Right. It's very much the idea of why would this man get to do whatever he wants and then the woman has to suffer for it.
Mm-hmm.
And it definitely, like you said, this film definitely plays on those fears of what if a woman got one over on a man? Mm-hmm. What if there was a shift in a power dynamic and a man was in trouble with a woman? You know, like we come from this period where like, oh, the man is superior and he lords over the women. And the idea that there would ever be a scenario where a woman would have some power over a man is terrifying.
Yeah. So as we see in the scene where he tries to sneak away after having sex and he tries to sort of smooth things over, she is upset about this arrangement. And he's like, you know, hey, we knew what we were getting into. We were just having a good time. And she very directly is like, you thought you would have a good time. You didn't think for a second about me. And saying, like, if you told me to fuck off, I'd have more respect for you. And there's such a cynicism there and just like a disappointment in her voice that I think does make you feel some sympathy for her. And then she cuts her wrists as a way of making him stay. And it's interesting to me how she makes that feel more complex than the story even dictates, because on the page it's like she's doing this to manipulate him into staying, right? But also this hopelessness that she is, you know, exuding here that feels like true depression is very palpable. And yes, she's kind of settled once Dan is starting to take care of her, which makes you be like, oh, maybe this was just a manipulation tactic. But there is that hint of a fragility there in the way that she looks at Dan that I think is really subtle and really nicely done, but another indication that she has respect for Alex in a way that the script sometimes doesn't.
What's interesting about that moment is that another film would have like played some kind of score over it and made it an obvious manipulative tactic.
Right.
But the film doesn't really do that here. It really shows that this is a very real moment of pain and not just like a manipulative thing, which is again a reason why the character is a lot more complicated than people at first glance give it credit for.
Yeah, for sure. Even now, as the film goes on, to me, I do get the indication that like if Dan just sat down with her and just had like a regular conversation with her, I think things could be smoothed over, perhaps.
Yeah, if Dan treated her like a real person, which he barely does from like the go in this film, I think they could have worked something out and maybe even like gotten her some sort of help. But he never really treats her as anything other than a fling, even when she's nearing like the real depths of what's going on with her. And that's the biggest problem with with Dan, just like as a person, that like he doesn't see her as a fully fledged human being.
Right. She's a plaything. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think a good scene for that is when she visits him in the office and is sort of reassuring him that she's doing better and offers him a ticket to see Madame Butterfly, with her, and he kind of politely is rejecting her, and you see her heart break in that moment of recognizing that he's just not interested in her anymore, that the affair is fully over. And it's very simple, but the way she says, "So I'll see you around sometime," it's like the opposite of that meme that's like, girl who is going to be okay. Like, she is gonna not take this well, as we see in the scene when he's like having fun in his happy suburban life and he's bowling with the wife and his friend, while she is sitting in the dark flicking the light on and off with tears in her eyes.
What an iconic image,
Mm-hmm.
truly, of all thrillers, is just her sitting in that room turning the lamp on and off.
Yeah.
Like, it's so memorable.
Yeah, it's such a haunting image, and it says everything without her having to say a word. And it's, again, why I do get frustrated when people want to paint Alex Forrest as two-dimensional. Again, maybe the ending does suggest that, but I do think to a certain extent in moments like that, the film does put in the work, and Glenn does too, to make you understand her on some level. So she, after that, is basically threatening him into seeing her again, where she is once again asserting that she wants to be with him, and she drops the bombshell that she's pregnant. I love the exchange that they have where he's like, "How do you know it's mine?" And she very quickly responds, "Because I don't sleep around." And just the certainty in her voice, you can tell that she's thought about that and how different this is for him versus her. And I guess I just think what makes it so effective is how calm and almost soothing her tone can be whilst she's saying these very threatening things that are gonna fundamentally mess up his life. And she's like, "Hey, you play fair with me, I'll play fair with you."
Yeah, I mean, like, what's great about the scene is that, like, it's not like she's manic here. She's talking with like such a reasonable voice.
Mm-hmm.
Like, all of this is just very natural. Like, there's nothing really like too quote unquote, like, there's nothing nuts going on here. This just feels like the right sequence of events. She's so like self-assured about how things are gonna like go here, and I just think it's really fascinating.
Yeah.
She's like, "Oh, we're gonna be together. I'm going to have this baby,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what you say. And it's up to you if you want to be a part of the baby's life. But I would really like it if you would."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It does just seem like a very reasonable conversation that you would overhear, but because of the other elements of this film, it feels a lot more threatening than it is.
Yeah.
Of course, we have to talk about the big line, which comes about when she is confronting him about taking responsibility, which he is still trying to avoid. And she says, "I'm not going to be ignored, Dan." The emphasis that she places on ignored, I think, is one of my favorite line readings. It's so distinct, and that's really the root of it all, is being ignored. And there's almost like a haughtiness there, like, "How dare you treat me this way? Like, I'm some slut you can bang and forget." It's like, these are the consequences of your actions.
It's the emotional culmination of a woman who, throughout her entire life, has been ignored and abandoned and not cared
Or
for. And
abused.
she finally,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, she finally finds a relationship that she thinks could be real and could work for her. And it starts falling apart, and it's a real like straw breaking the camel's back here moment for her, where she's done being abused and pushed aside.
Yeah. And again, what do you think of the line reading?
It's so specific,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why it's so memorable. That's why it's a line reading that people like still quote today. It's such a great choice
Mm-hmm.
on how to do it. And there's like the kind of tilt that she does with her head
Yes.
in that moment that is also just like putting it all together. I think it's one of the great Glenn Close moments.
Yes. Totally agree. We then have this series of unhinged behavior from Alex, including boiling their family bunny, kidnapping their daughter and going on a roller coaster with her, continuing to stalk him. And it's fair to say that maybe she's lost the plot by this point, But for me, I do get the feeling of her being in so much emotional pain, and none of it justifies what she does. But again, she has such respect for Alex, and even with the kind of maniacal expressions that are sort of asked of her, the wide eyes and the smiling through all this, she does just feel justified in what she's doing, because none of it for her compares to the pain of him discarding her like she's trash. And that's what I
Yeah.
see, especially in her face during the knife confrontation, which is very intense and physical and scary. But when he backs away and leaves, there is that sort of expression on her face that's like, that's the pain right there. That feeling that if he just treats her with the respect she feels she deserves, that all of this could be settled.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes. So now we should talk about the ending, which was
the two endings.
Okay, yes, the two endings. So the one that we get ultimately in theaters was shot after test screenings basically rejected the original ending and wanted Alex to be punished in brutal fashion, I would say. And Glenn hated doing this ending. She really resisted it, where Alex is confronting Dan's wife in the bathroom and talks very plainly about her motivations through all of this. And Dan tries to drown her, and you think she's dead, and then like she rises up like she's Michael Myers or something. And the
Yeah.
wife shoots her. The nuclear family is restored. Yay, happy ending. You know.
It's absolutely the Hollywood ending of this movie, where it's like we have to lean into the popcorn thriller elements of this film. I don't think it's bad, but I think the original ending is better. And I think it gives much more dimensionality to the character than this, which is just such a flat villain portrayal that kind of blunts the previous
nuance
few acts of the movie.
yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a very cheap audience pandering ending that I happen to dislike. Glenn has said, not really in defense of it, but just saying like why this happened is that she feels that the audience needed some catharsis after everything that the original ending might not have given them. That's kind of how she justifies it, because again, she maintains that she didn't want to do this. But the original ending, which makes more sense with the story, is when Alex actually kills herself with the knife that Dan used in their earlier confrontation and frames him for her murder. And then the wife discovers that cassette tape that Alex had sent Dan, which then reveals that she had threatened to kill herself, which kind of exonerates Dan. I would say a much smarter ending. And then you also get this sort of operatic moment at the end of flashing back to Alex slicing her throat, which makes it so much more tragic to me and effective, rather than what we actually get, which is that standard kind of like horror movie ending.
Yeah, I think audiences at the time were not comfortable or not ready to sympathize with the character. I think they, like you said, she is a bad villain. She needs to be punished. And in this original ending, which makes more sense, is more dynamic, nobody really wins in the ending of the original movie. It's such a dark ending to watch her slit her own throat and then just slow fade to credits.
Yeah.
Like it is a bleak ending to that character, but it makes more sense and it makes the film better.
Yeah, because it seems like when you watch that ending, it's like, okay, that makes sense why we linger on the knife after that's all settled, why the Madame Butterfly reference in the beginning, the operatic nature of it, it all seems to be leading to this original ending. But yeah, either way, I think Glenn Close completely knew the assignment and fully committed to this character to a dangerous and terrifying level, which is why she scared so many people and became this cultural sort of touch point that people wanted to talk about. There was a lot of discourse after this movie, including from, single working women who felt that this was a negative thing that this was out there in the world, that this was kind of like a, stereotyping in a bad way. But Glenn has kind of just maintained that Alex is ultimately just a victim of emotional abuse. And that's really what it comes down to for me. And yes, it did become like that social commentary ultimately that I don't know if they anticipated ahead of time, but that's kind of where I'm at with it.
Yeah. I don't think the 80s would be what they are without this movie and this performance.
Yeah.
And I'm very, very glad that not only was she nominated for Best Actress, but the film's nominated for Best Picture.
Yeah.
So I think it's something that doesn't happen often at the Oscars, if at all. So it feels like a big moment.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So that's all I have on Glenn for now. Let's move on to Holly Hunter in broadcast news. So excited to introduce her as well. So she was born and raised in Georgia, and she eventually found her way to Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, where she did theater. Then she moved to New York, where she actually was rooming with Frances McDormand. She made her Broadway debut with Crimes of the Heart, which we just talked about last week with that film adaptation. And then she had her film debut in a slasher film called The Burning. She had a few tiny roles after that in film and TV before she had her big 1987, where she not only had broadcast news, but also Raising Arizona, which was her big breakthrough working with the Coen brothers there. But broadcast news really made her the talk of the town when it was released at the end of the year. So this is also the follow-up to James L. Brooks's incredible feature debut, Terms of Endearment, and there was almost a reunion for him with Deborah Winger, who was originally sought to play this role of Jane, but she had to drop out, and Holly Hunter emerged after a long casting process. So broadcast news is set at a news station in Washington, D.C., and it centers on three characters. One is Jane Craig, played by Holly, very driven and direct TV news producer. Albert Brooks is Aaron, a writer and reporter who's very close friends with Jane. And then William Hurt is Tom, a new arrival in town who becomes the new anchor for their news bureau. And what he lacks in knowledge and reverence for hard news, he kind of makes up for in charisma and knowing how to sell a story. So it's about the three of them and how they complicate each other's lives, with Jane taking a romantic interest in Tom while Aaron is pining for Jane, who kind of sees Aaron as more of a friend. But also loving Tom means possibly compromising Jane's morals. So, really fun one to talk about here. Let's talk broadcast news and Holly Hunter. Thoughts on the great Holly Hunter and her star-making performance here?
Holly Hunter is great. Broadcast news is such a pitch perfect film, and I think this is the Holly Hunter performance. I know she's going to win later on for The Piano, which is a movie that I like, but this is for me it for Holly Hunter. This is such a perfect blend of comedy and drama. It's one of those Star is Born performances, really, where you see that she can do both really, really well.
Both what? Comedy and drama?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much in the same way that Glenn Close and Fatal Attraction is the blueprint for those sort of performances. Holly Hunter in broadcast news is the blueprint for all of the hyper competent working woman performances that would come like the decades after this. Very much in the same way that I was saying, like Rosamund Pike in Gone Girl doesn't exist without Glenn Close and Fatal Attraction. I think one of the more notable comedic TV performances of the past decade, Amy Poehler as Leslie Knope in Parks and Rec, does not exist without Holly Hunter in broadcast news.
Yeah.
And what I really like is the trio here. I think she works so well with both Albert Brooks and William Hurt. And also, she has some of the great line readings as well. There's some really great line readings from her. I really like her performance. I'm a big fan of it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we are 2 for 2 in this category so far. Holly Hunter is definitely one of those actresses who, even if I don't immediately seek out all of her work, I'm always just thrilled to see her in anything. You know, she has such a great quirky presence. Her voice is unmistakable, and she's been able to maintain this kind of spitfire energy well into her 60s by this point that I find just really charming. And this is just the quintessential Holly Hunter role. Like you said, she's spunky, she's playful, she's vulnerable when she needs to be, and it's just one of those roles and performances where you would think that Hollywood would be like, oh, this is our next big rom-com star, even though she actually doesn't do very many rom-coms at all after this, which is surprising, but may have been her choice. But she's just so fully formed, so winning, that you almost can't believe that this is one of her first roles on film. She is just very confident and nuanced, because I think also the script is so well written. This is where I can also note that I did read the script for broadcast news before doing this rewatch, and what was remarkable to me was how so much of her dialogue on the page, in the wrong actor's hands, could make Jane feel like such a wishy-washy person who keeps having all these conflicting feelings, and kind of make her like a basket case, as she calls herself at one point in the film. But she has such a comfortability with the character and a warmth and a love for Jane that it never feels like she's playing anything up or heightening it. And she has so many weird little specific gestures and is like playing with her voice in such an endearing way to make her seem kind of dorky and awkward at times. But it's never unbearable, which it very well could be.
She doesn't feel like a caricature here. She feels like a real person.
Yeah.
And I think it would be very easy to, again, like play this up too much and make her like a real, a manic pixie dream girl sort of thing that we would get a few decades from now. But no, she feels like a real lived in person, which is really impressive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it just fundamentally comes down to Jane is really good at her job and knows that she's good. And also she has the burden of that knowledge, feeling like the smartest person in the room, and how her inability to not voice what she thinks or how she thinks something should be done can get her in trouble in her personal life. But also she can't help but to be herself, you know?
It's the line from the script and the way that she reads it. I think I remember the first time I saw it, I'm like, that's so great. And I think about it all the time, is when they're at the party right before they have to go off and do that big news story that pops up. And I think it's the head of the news division that brings her outside, and she talks about how it shouldn't be Tom, it should be Aaron that's doing the broadcast. And the head of the news division says, it must be nice to always believe you know better, to always think you're the smartest person in the room. And she says, no, it's awful. I think about that all the time. It's such a great encapsulation of who that character is, where she knows that she knows what she's doing. You see from the intro of the film that she has been on this track to be who she is for years and years. And yet at the same time, there's still this hurdle that she can't quite get over, where she isn't in enough of an authority position to really push the ideas that she has. When she starts to be able to get into making the decisions in the room, and people really see how well she does her job, she starts to get some of that confidence back. But it's that period right there, right at the beginning of the movie, where you really get a sense of who this character is just from those 3 words.
And the way she says it, like she's exasperated, like, no, it's awful. Yes.
Yeah.
And also one of the opening scenes as well for her is when she's like done all her work in the morning. She's gotten the newspaper, she's made her calls, she's doing her job with this sort of hyper competence. And then she unplugs the phone and sits on the bed and just sobs for like 30 seconds. And then she's done and she can go about her day, which may be ridiculous looking at first, but it's actually a very healthy thing that I think people should maybe do more of, like scheduled crying.
It kind of feels to me, I feel like this is like an odd diversion, but it's the sort of thing of like the Jack Shepherd thing and Lost, where it's like you give yourself 10 seconds to just let all of it in, and then you let it go and you get to work.
Yeah.
And you see her, and what I like is that, like, you see this moment happen multiple times in the film. So it's not like it's, oh, she's having a bad day and she just needs a minute to cool off. It's very clear that she feels this way a lot, but she's figured out how to handle it. She knows that she needs to give herself 30 seconds, like, every few days. And it shows that, like, even though it looks like this is all very seamless and easy for her, that it does require some effort. And that also gives her a lot of humanity.
Yes, it does create this great human connection with her from the beginning that she plays with so much openness. I think otherwise we may see her as just that know-it-all in all the expected ways, but I think that scene does operate on multiple levels because it's showing that she leads that stressful life, but it's also revealing of the character that she is scheduling her own emotions away from other people because she's also a woman in a primarily male dominated world. So she doesn't want to just be seen as emotional in that way in front of her colleagues,
Mm-hmm.
So I think
Yeah,
that's
she's always by herself when these moments happen, which is, yeah, something that I didn't really notice until you just brought it up.
And we definitely have to talk about her chemistry with both of the guys here. First of all, meeting William Hurt as Tom, who is like this ultimate himbo, just not a thought in his head other than how to sell himself. But he's also attractive and affable, but she takes an interest in him, and it's like this classic screwball dynamic, I think, that they have that they both are really well suited to. Her being intense and it's all about her job. He's a little looser and they both kind of help each other. Again, a standard dynamic, but she also, I think, contrasts that sort of uptight stereotype with this charisma she has. I think her laugh is really infectious, and I love how you see her awareness of not being able to help herself but to say what's exactly on her mind. Like when she calls Aaron after that and she's like, I'm beginning to repel the people I'm trying to seduce. And she knows it, but she's always gonna want to correct people and keep a certain level of integrity because that's just what makes her good at her job. And she can't separate that at this point.
Right. It's a real sense of, like, hyper self-awareness. Like, she's very aware of who she is as a person, even when it's like kind of detrimental what she's trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah. But I absolutely love the chemistry with Jane and Aaron, Albert Brooks, which, if I'm watching this as like a TV show, this is like one of those classic, like, will they, won't they types of couples, I think. But they're so on the same wavelength and they make such a great team, especially when he's helping her out on the phone from home when she's producing live on the air. There's just this great mutual respect between the two of them. For me, it's the kind of dynamic that I'm such a sucker for. Like, even if they don't get together, and sometimes it's for the better that they don't get together. And things obviously change by the end. But in that first half, at least, their kind of snarky quips, their ability to just vent to each other, it's like they're each other's person.
Yeah, I agree. It really does have that sense of, these are two people that are very good at their jobs, have been working together for a long time. So I like that you slip right into that dynamic, like, immediately when the movie starts. And as you go on further in the film and Aaron is more, like, forthcoming about the way that he feels, it feels very organic. Like, it's not like it comes out of nowhere. You can kind of tell where it's coming from when it shows up.
Yeah. And also, I feel like there's a version of this where they're kind of palling around and their repartee could be too cutesy or like kind of insufferable maybe, but I think both Holly and Albert Brooks provide just the right abrasiveness at times to balance some of that out, and even some emotional distance whenever he tries to cross the line into romance and him being kind of hapless and insecure and whatnot. It's like they're both kind of playing types, but they're both smart enough as actors to make them more complicated than just types.
Yeah, the script is such a strong base here, and I think the actors are really able to flesh out the sort of emotions that the script isn't quite able to like get all the way. I mean, the script is great. The
Mm-hmm.
script is perfect. But I think without these people and these performances, I don't know if the movie is as good.
Yes. And
Yeah.
I think she's really, really incredible when she's trying to process her own emotions when it comes to her personal life. Like at that brunch, which is the one that leads up to her line about, no, it's awful. She is talking with one of the female newscasters who's asking about Tom and whether she should pursue him. And Jane is like, of course I don't mind. Wait, I do mind. Like basically her mind is gonna, like, it's just going a mile a minute, and she's able to make those changing emotions that, like, when I'm reading that in the script, I feel like if I'm imagining trying to be an actor, trying to like sort of act those changing emotions out, and it's a lot harder than it looks, and she makes it feel very natural and sort of spontaneous when it could be very clumsy, I think.
Yeah, I agree. She says so much with her face, but it's not in the kind of subtle way like how Glenn Close does,
Yeah.
but just like the way that her face looks when she says stuff, when she's doing that very moment where her face kind of scrunches up a little bit when she
Mm.
realizes that it does matter to her whether or not Tom is going out with somebody else.
Yeah.
It's very funny.
And she doesn't really seem to have very much of a filter, you know? So she's kind of just vocalizing so much of what she's feeling just like in the moment. And again, without it feeling like obnoxious. And then we get this, I think, other layer to the performance when she is starting to work hard to be kind and take a different tact when Tom is asking her opinion on the piece that he did about date rape, where it's a very affecting interview, and then it cuts to Tom tearing up in the interview, which gets a rise out of Aaron because he doesn't think that they, as reporters, should be the focus. But it does have an impact on the women in the office, and she's just telling Tom like, well, maybe I wouldn't have cut to you listening to the victim and having that single tear, but also it did move me, and maybe it's okay. And she doesn't approach it like she may have done before, being a little flippant with it, because she also really likes Tom and she doesn't want to be too cruel with it. So it's like we're seeing her gradually evolving, and it feels natural to me that she would do so, because not only does she like him, but she sees the effect that the report is having on the women in the office who are watching it.
Yeah, I really like that moment because of how it kind of relates to what ends up happening with Tom towards the end of the film is that she tells herself at the beginning to not really be taken in by this guy who's a lot of flash and not a lot of substance. And yet when that flash starts to really like show itself, she does start to get taken in by it despite her better judgment.
Exactly. Yeah. And that relationship with Tom is pretty up and down from there. They have their sort of prom scene moment where they see each other get all dressed up and the correspondence dinner, and they're very charming. But then she does tense up when things start to get too close too soon. Because on some levels, she does agree with what Aaron said about him and his
Yeah, that
phoniness.
I like I think it's the best Albert Brooks moment in the movie when they're at his house and he does a speech about how he's the devil.
Yeah.
That whole moment there, and that big fight between Holly Hunter and Albert Brooks is like one of the, I think, the great scenes in the movie where you really feel how torn she is between this guy that she knows but can't quite deal with how he is kind of like whining a bit, and this other guy who doesn't really match her kind of morals, but she's still attracted to him anyway. It's such a great, it's, I think, one of the best love triangles of the 80s
Mm.
for sure.
Yeah, that scene, they're very honest with each other, especially Aaron, and it does hurt her. You can see it in her face to hear what he's saying. But deep down, I think she still is conflicted about all of this. And she kind of is fighting back, but you can see just visibly she knows that there's some truth to what he's saying about Tom, and she doesn't maybe want to admit it. Or it just goes back to that thing where she can't help the way she feels. I think that's the sort of, guiding force for Holly, is this tension of feeling very deeply about things and always wanting to follow the truth, even if it messes up her personal life or gets her in some trouble with anything she's doing outside of work. And it just kind of makes things messy and complicated, which I think James L. Brooks is really, he thrives in that messiness.
Yeah, it's the mode that he works in the best. And what I really like about the Aaron and Tom characters here is that in any other kind of rom-com movie, it would be very obvious that Tom is the bad guy and Aaron is the good guy,
Yeah.
and there's not a lot of gray in between. But they're both really complicated. They both have their positives and their negatives. And it's just like, oh, Albert Brooks is the nerdy hero who's supposed to get the girl, but he's so like mean to Holly Hunter in so many scenes in this movie that it's kind of like, I don't know which side of the relationship I'm supposed to be rooting for here, know, which is another reason why the movie's so good.
Yes, it's the classic thing of him feeling entitled to her because he's nice to her and they have a nice time together.
Yeah,
which I think is, I think the film and James L. Brooks knows what he's doing with that character, and it feels like it is advanced for its time to be treating a male character like that.
Absolutely, because you get characters like him nowadays a lot, but back then it was really like, it felt really fresh and new to have a character like what Albert Brooks is doing here.
Yeah. I also love the scene where it's layoff day and she has such an empathy for just all of the loss that's going on in the office, all the jobs that are lost, the people she may never see again. And you see how, this is where her real love is. It's with these people working this job that she's so passionate about. And yes, she'll take that vacation with Tom, who's being relocated to London, but she's not going to revel in getting a promotion in the middle of all this devastation around her like Tom is feeling.
Can we do a real quick Joan Cusack corner?
Joan Cusack appreciation corner, yes.
Oh my goodness. What a great time I have seeing Joan Cusack in this film. She's such a fun, bright light in this movie. And the sequence at the beginning of the movie that is like truly incredibly thrilling when they have like mere seconds to get the revised tape on the air, and she's running through the office and she's ducking under filing cabinets and jumping over children. I mean, that's a tier Joan Cusack moment there. Yes. Truly.
Yes, she should have won a special Oscar for stunts in 1987.
Truly.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Very much feels like a precursor to what she would do the next year with Working Girl, which she does get a nomination for. But even though Joan Cusack is only in this movie for probably like 5 minutes, I would argue she makes such a big impression that I would have loved a nomination. But
yep.
Also, another tangent here is I feel like with so many movies and shows about like dysfunctional workplaces, that's kind of like the central thing of how much it sucks to work at a certain place. And obviously we have some ups and downs that we see with this news station, but there's such a nice sort of camaraderie, sort of like an in the trenches feeling that I get, especially from Jane. It's sort of like, this job can be pretty shitty at times, but also, don't we love it? Doesn't the good sort of outweigh the bad? That's something that really struck me on this rewatch, is how it doesn't like romanticize it necessarily, but it's just kind of nice to see that camaraderie.
Yeah, it's like this was when broadcast news was a big deal, and it's like we're all doing important work here, even if it's tough sometimes. We all know what the stakes are, and I like that about the tone of the film.
Yeah. And of course, the moment where she is witnessing the raw footage of Tom in that interview is very affecting, because at first, like, she's not wanting to believe that Tom faked his single tear reaction in the rape victim interview, which Aaron has tipped her off about, that, how did we get that shot on Tom when there was only one camera crew just trained on this woman that he was talking to? And so she reviews the tape. And at first, she's kind of like laughing along with Tom, who's making his little quips in the footage and everything. But then as it goes on, the truth is revealed that it was staged and that he essentially faked the tear, and her face just drops. And she's so frustrated and disappointed because it does cross a line, and you know exactly what she's feeling.
They did the tear in post.
Yes.
And it's such a violation of what she stands for. So when she goes to the airport and is so mad at Tom, it's so justified because he's a big faker.
Yeah, he's an actor.
Yeah, all this time where she thought that he was really getting into the nitty-gritty of the news, that he was starting to get some substance, it ends up being that all along he was really focusing more on the presentation over the content after all.
Yep.
And it's such a betrayal, and it's such a great it's such a great scene between the two of them right at that end of the movie.
It's devastating for her, but we do get some resolution that she's going to be okay in the end, that it was never really about a guy for her. It wasn't about picking a side between the two of them, which I think is also what makes this such a fun contrast with Fatal Attraction, that we have basically two sides of the same coin with working women in the 80s. One is clearly more of a positive message than the other, but they're also just doing very different things, so it's hard to fully compare, but it is just fascinating to get this sort of snapshot from two very different angles.
I think it's so interesting to have a coda to this particular film to show that like several years later, they're all still friends, they're all on good terms, they can like hang out together and support each other, despite the fact that both of these relationships at the very end of the movie end on kind of a sour note. You would think that, oh, you know, the movie's going to end here and she's kind of friends with Albert Brooks and she's on a bad place with William Hurt. But in the final moments of the movie, they're all together, they're hanging out. And I think that's also what I like about the movie, that it's able to end on a positive note here.
Yeah, I think so, because they're all adults.
Yeah, they're not babies, they're all adults. We can kind of like work together.
Exactly. Yeah. So Holly Hunter, I think, is incredible in this movie. I think it's just an astonishing like breakthrough kind of performance, that she fully takes the bull by the horns here, and it seems like this role was written for her almost, even though it wasn't, because it was kind of written for Deborah Winger essentially, which I think she would have been good in with this, but I think Holly Hunter kind of has a little bit more of a warmth perhaps than Deborah Winger might have brought to it, because she's a little more flinty at times.
That's the thing that I like about the choice to have Holly Hunter here, and just seeing Holly Hunter in other projects like the decades going forward, is that like whenever you see her on screen, you know that you're like in good hands. You know that I feel comfortable with this actress, and I feel comfortable with whatever character she's playing. And I don't know if I really like Deborah Winger in terms of endearment, but I don't know if I would have liked her in this particular role. I think this is the role for Holly Hunter, and I'm really glad that it happened. This movie is so great. It's so rewatchable.
Yes, it really is. Okay, shall we move on to our next nominee? We got an interesting one here to talk about.
Oh boy.
Yes.
Oh boy.
All right, Sally Kirkland in Anna. Very excited to delve into Sally Kirkland and her incredible story of getting this Oscar nomination. So, first of all, Sally Kirkland is the daughter of a fashion editor for Life magazine, also named Sally Kirkland. And this Sally grew up really wanting to be an actress. At one point, she actually met David O. Selznick, the famous producer, because she was dating his son. And David became a bit of a mentor to her, and he basically told her to rack up a bunch of credits in film and TV and theater to really prove herself, which is exactly what she did. And by the time Anna came out, she had been in 27 movies, a whole bunch of TV, theater. She really was that classic sort of journeyman or journeywoman actress who took on a lot of smaller roles, and she came close to having her big break so many times. Like, apparently, I don't know if you knew this, but Robert De Niro, who was her friend, had wanted her for The King of Comedy, but that role went to Sandra Bernhard instead. And she's just
Oh
had,
wow.
yeah, she's just had so many close breaks up to this point. And then Anna comes along, which is this indie film. It's about a struggling actress named Anna, played by Sally Kirkland, who is in America after being essentially exiled from her home country of Czechoslovakia. And she's been in New York for many years now, but is struggling to make ends meet as an actress. Then this young woman, also from Czechoslovakia, named Christina, arrives, and Anna is basically her idol. So Anna takes her in and is helping her to become an actress herself. And then Christina actually manages to find some success pretty quickly, and some rifts are formed in their relationship. So let's talk Sally Kirkland, and we can get into her campaign maybe a little later, but just thoughts on Sally, her getting this nomination, and her very bold performance here in Anna.
So I had heard about Sally Kirkland like repeatedly just from people in your circle on film Twitter of like, this is Sally Kirkland in this year. She comes out of nowhere, a real Cinderella story to get this nomination. I had no idea to expect because I had no idea what this movie was. And this movie, I believe, when I first started watching it, the first like 5-10 minutes of this movie, I'm like, this thing has a budget of, I have to guess, $8,000.
Sure.
She is the driving force of this film. You can tell this is someone who has been working for a very, very long time, because she holds nothing back in this particular performance from very much from the get-go. I think that that opening sequence when she's auditioning in the big theater, immediately you get a sense of who this character is. I think this is a really interesting, fascinating film. I think it's definitely buoyed by her performance, and I think the performance of Paulina Porizkova is a great one to balance her out with. But I think the direction is bizarre. The script is odd, but it feels to me like a real Hail Mary sort of nomination here. I don't know if that's like the right phrase, but it's a sort of thing of like, there's a lot of really big movies this year in this particular category with a lot of huge stars, including Meryl Streep and Cher. And Sally Kirkland gets in here through, I feel like, sheer force of will. I feel like she pushes herself to get this nomination. And I think it's a really interesting performance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is one that I had been eagerly anticipating watching eventually because of Sally's legendary campaign, her rise from mostly unknown actress, at least in the mainstream, to being alongside people like Cher and Meryl Streep in this category. And I had heard that Anna was a pretty wild movie. I wasn't entirely sure what to expect because I didn't have very much of a relationship with Sally Kirkland as an actress before this, but I have to say she really did impress me here. This is definitely an odd movie with some interesting creative choices. It's very 80s indie, sort of experimental at times. I would also say that, like, why has David Lynch not cast Sally Kirkland in anything? They seem very well suited creatively. There were a few times actually watching it where she did remind me a little bit of like a Laura Dern. But anyway, yes, I love how fully she dominates the screen here. It's a very showy performance. She's playing an actress. She's doing a Czech accent, but not overdoing it necessarily to where it seems too much like a stereotype. She has breakdowns. She goes on this big emotional journey, but to me, it does feel believable. She's just very committed and raw. Then it feels like the kind of performance where the actress knows that this is her big shot. So she's going to leave absolutely everything on the table, no crumbs, and she comes out of it as, you know, I mean, obviously the best part of the film.
What I think is so great about her performance here is that it is in no way one note. Like there's a lot of dignity to her character. There's a lot of sadness to her character. There's a lot of anger in her character. There's not a lot of joy in the life of Anna, but it's not portrayed in a way that is like overly morose. Like it's not like this is like some sort of Shakespearean tragedy for her.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a bleak film, but it is a weird movie.
Deeply weird.
The plot itself is really kind of a pseudo All About Eve sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But like I had mentioned the other day, it also gives me these kind of odd Mulholland Drive almost sort of thoughts.
That's what I'm saying.
Where it's just like it's this kind of normal, not normal. It's this kind of regular woman in a world that feels kind of off kilter.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a lot of directorial choices here where there's like no sound, where there's like no real score. The different little characters that pop up out of nowhere.
Yeah.
These sort of like odd melodramatic moments,
Mm-hmm.
that feel really unreal. And throughout all of these kind of eccentricities of the film, she's such a rock where like whenever she's on screen, you really can't take her eyes off of her. And she's really believable in all of these bizarre circumstances.
Yes, exactly. And also, I think as we're presented to her in the beginning, her life is a mess. She's hurrying to get ready for this audition that she didn't know was in 30 minutes. She's stumbling around in her high heels. And I feel like there is a little bit of that parallel with Sally herself, maybe being that hardworking, scrappy actress who may have been in a similar situation of really pounding the pavement and auditioning and really just dedicating herself to her craft, even with how difficult this whole process is. I think she gets that, and you can feel that energy from her as Anna, but also there's that weariness in her face, even in like with her auditioning and stuff, and being like, Jesus, I have to go through all of this again just to probably get rejected, you know?
Mm-hmm. Not to harp on like the shoestring budget of this film, but the score itself, just like as an aside, sounds like the score to a Game Boy Color game. I know it's the 80s, but I
Yeah.
could not take my figurative ears off of the opening of this film where I'm like, this sounds like a Looney Tunes game from 1996.
Yeah, it's not a movie that ages particularly well, per se, compared to even what we've talked about with like Fatal Attraction not aging well. This feels like directly placed in 1987.
It is the most 1987 you could get.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about that opening sequence where she's auditioning and she has to hop on one foot and turn around in a circle and is really just willing to do whatever it takes to get a break.
Yes, she is directed to do Humpty Dumpty nursery rhymes, and she is just screaming Humpty Dumpty, twirling around on one foot. She really goes for it, and I think it's pretty riveting.
Yeah, I couldn't stop looking at it. I'm like, she is, like you had said previously, no crumbs.
Yes. And even in that same scene, there's like one of the people who's casting this play, one of the producers, is saying that he wants someone with a presence. And it feels like she does carry that experience and a weight to her of, you know, at first not wanting to play these silly little improv games that the other producer's trying to make them do. But she's like, just give me a direction and I will do whatever you need me to do. And that is what she does. And that feels like Sally could have had that same conversation with the director here.
Yeah. And again, it's like that. It's very much that sort of Lynchian sort of quality here where all of the other people in this theater, the other actors auditioning and the producers that are looking up at them from the ground floor are all real weirdos.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I think personally is refreshing. These feel
Yep.
like real people they found off the street.
Yep.
In a good way, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But then, of course, this young woman, Christina, is coming from Czechoslovakia who idolizes her. And she's a bit hesitant at first, but she does end up taking her under her wing because she doesn't really have a lot in her life, but also because she is, I think, kind of how I interpret it is that she is a reminder of home. And their relationship obviously evolves over the course of the film, but she does have this kindness in her eyes in those initial scenes because she feels appreciated. And I think they do have a nice energy together, the sort of protector and the protege, and her kind of channeling her own dreams for herself in this country into Christina. Like when she's telling her what to say on the phone, like those scenes are really sweet and feel more natural than a lot of the film outside of that, which can feel a little schematic to me, just like what the actual plot is.
Right. I
Yeah,
really like the decision to not subtitle anything in this movie.
that's true.
When Christina first arrives, they're speaking Czech for a lot of that first like half hour of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And you can get what's going on through context clues, but you don't really know what's going on between the two of them. But you can get the dynamic just through the way they act towards each other, which is interesting.
The energy. Yeah, definitely. And I think one fantastic scene for Sally Kirkland is when they're both in bed together with Christina, and she's delving into her background all in one take. And she talks about, beating up the son of a Russian ambassador and being against the communist regime in Czechoslovakia, and how she went to prison and how her baby was born in a prison, but then the baby died and she left the country with her husband, but then he became famous working for MTV and left her. Like, it's such a long and wild monologue, but she makes it feel surprisingly natural, and like she's kind of mulled over her past a lot over the years and the sort of life that she's lived up to that point. And I'm not saying she's quite on this level necessarily, but to me it did remind me of like what Meryl was doing in Sophie's Choice, which is just like tackling this huge monologue and being patient with it and making it as natural as possible. And it sort of is serving to give context for us about why she's so desperate to make it in America finally, because she's trying to do something positive with her life. And it's not like she has regrets, but she's just like, at this point, she's just looking for a win anywhere she can find it.
It's truly a wild moment in the movie, because up to that point, it's like, oh, she's an immigrant, she's a struggling actress, she's trying to make it work. And when you hear her story of how she got to America, it's a really like arresting moment. It's such a great monologue.
Yeah, again, all in one take. There's also the scene where she's an understudy for the play and the lead actress is unavailable, so she finally has the chance of like going on, but then the actress finally does arrive at the last minute, and I love how you see her face just drops. And there's something in Sally Kirkland's eyes, also how wide she's able to make them, that makes you really feel the desperation and the pain of once again having yet another opportunity snatched away from her. And there's really not many good moments for her after that in terms of like positive things in her life, because she kind of spirals from there.
Yeah, it's a lot of kicking Anna around in this movie. It's such a that is, I think, one of the more disheartening moments in the film, because she is like inches away from finally getting to do the thing that she wants. But when the actress that she's understudying for shows up like minutes before the play goes on, when when the director says, take off the costume, you're like, well, the play's about to start. You could just let her go on. She knows the lines, but like the people around her have so little respect for her as an actor. It's such a rough moment for her, and like you said, it really is the moment where things kind of start to go from bad to worse for her.
Yeah. So after we see her witness Christina on a talk show having booked a movie gig, and sees her stealing Anna's life story. I think that's another very good scene for Sally, where she is showing such a shock at first, but then this explosive anger after that.
The last 10 minutes of this movie, I think, are as almost as good as any ending to a David Lynch film. It's just such a dreamlike sequence of events where it's just worst case scenario after worst case scenario. I love how we zoom in on the television when Christina's giving that interview and just saying almost verbatim the monologue that Sally Kirkland gives.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the most like arresting moments in the movie that is kind of on the nose, but I still like love so much is that back in Czechoslovakia, she's a big deal. She was a really well respected actress. She comes to America and she can't make it work. And she goes to this Czech film festival in this theater. And there's a smattering of people there. She's seeing herself in an old film. It's in black and white. And it's that moment where you see the film burn up. Like it all like it just falls apart.
Yeah.
And you just cut from the recording falling apart and the film burning up. You cut from that to her face, and it really is such a surprising and moving moment for her. You know what I like about it and what I appreciate in context of the film and of Sally Kirkland as an actress. And it's just that sense of being so close and working so hard to get that recognition. And yet at every turn, it just doesn't pan out. It's such an ending to the movie.
Yeah, her seeing her own face basically go up in flames. It's very, very dark, very upsetting, but she plays just like the helplessness of seeing this firsthand, I think, very, very powerfully. So, yeah, it's really an effective performance, and I do love the meta layers of Sally Kirkland herself also being this actress who keeps wanting this big break. And it did actually happen for her in this case. So this definitely had a happier ending than Anna's story that we see by the end of the film. But yeah, I think it's just really, really strong work. I was very impressed by Sally here because, again, this is a really phenomenal lineup, and she is easily the least known of these five, but she proves here that she can sort of contend with the great leading lady stars of this era.
I don't know if this is a film that the average film goer would like, but I think if you're the sort of person that watches a lot of nominated films, that is really interested in the Oscars and in actresses and in performances, I think this is really one that is worth watching. Yeah. I think it's worth watching this film.
Absolutely. I agree. Okay, shall we move on to our final losing nominee?
Yes.
Okay, Meryl Streep in Ironweed. So this is Meryl Streep's 7th Oscar nomination in 10 years, which is incredibly impressive. It's her 5th in lead. And what's notable about this one is that she didn't get any precursor nominations leading up to it. So this might arguably be the start of the Meryl name check pattern with the Oscars, perhaps. Not saying she's not deserving here, but the idea of her almost always being in consideration, I think, sort of starts here, especially because very few of her films that she gets nominations for after this moving forward usually don't get very many other nominations, so it's really just her, you know? But especially for a movie like Ironweed, which is based on a Pulitzer Prize-winning book about homelessness in America during the Great Depression, wasn't exactly a box office sensation, and it was critically mixed. So the film takes place in New York during the Great Depression in the 30s, and it's about Francis Phelan, played by Jack Nicholson, who is living on the street, and he has this community that he hangs with sometimes. He has a girlfriend, Helen, played by Meryl Streep, and most of the film is about Francis and his own coping with the past, which includes a time when he accidentally dropped his young son and killed him, and also other parts in his life that literally haunt him and kind of manifest in front of him. And then meanwhile, we have Meryl as Helen, and she is also unhoused, and she is a former singer, and we see how she is coping with living on the street. So kind of on parallel journeys for the two of them. But let's talk the great Meryl Streep. Thoughts on the legendary Meryl overall and her performance here in Ironweed.
I like Meryl. I think the career of Meryl Streep starts out very strong. I haven't seen any of her nominations from the 90s yet, so I'm excited to see how a lot of those pan out. But it feels like such an up and down trajectory for Meryl. She's certainly one of the most iconic actresses of her generation, but I feel like she enters this odd period after Sophie's Choice. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe even after. I think I'd say more after Silkwood, where the things that she's nominated before are kind of, for me, give or take. I think her nomination for Out of Africa is kind of a snooze. Mm-hmm. And I think this one here in Ironweed is only marginally better. She's not in a terrible lot of this film.
Nope.
She's certainly what I think this is very much a sort of case that I think we see more nowadays than we did back then. But despite the fact that she's in not too much of this film, she is a lead here because she is Meryl Streep. Mm-hmm. I think she has a handful of good sequences here, but she doesn't even have too much time with Jack Nicholson on screen.
It's really only in the beginning for her.
It's really only in the beginning. Mm-hmm. I think the scenes that she's in Ironweed are good, but she's not in enough of the film and doesn't have enough of an impact here to really push this to one of the higher Meryl Streep nominations. Of all the ones that I've seen so far, I think this is probably the one for me that's at the bottom.
Well, I really like Meryl here. It's definitely not among her top performances by any means, but I think when you look at it on paper, it's like, this is Meryl. She's doing an accent, playing a poor person. You kind of have an image in your mind of what this is going to be. And I think it can kind of be about the transformation sometimes for Meryl and her sort of showing her skills more than an actual natural performance and an actual character. But I do think she is pretty convincing as this woman. You know, she finally arrives like a half hour into the movie, and she does make a big impression. You see her making big choices. She has this kind of frank sensibility in her body language, this feeling that she has nothing to prove to anyone, really. And they are kind of, her and Jack Nicholson, they're kind of like going back and forth like an old married couple almost. She has that thick Bronx accent, which I think isn't too distracting, but is certainly a noticeable choice. But I do think that, at least in the beginning, the two of them do have a nice rapport together, and they make what could feel like movie stars doing, you know, poverty porn into a realistic sort of bonding of kind of how shitty their circumstances are. And I don't know if you will agree with me on this, but I do think her sections of the movie help to enliven the film a little, because I think Jack is very good, but he's also kind of like perpetually tired. And there's just not a lot of narrative momentum to the film. We're sort of just following around place to place. And I think I don't know, I feel like it reads better on paper than it does on film.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think Jack Nicholson is starting to enter his old man Jack era.
Yeah.
Very slowly but surely becoming old cad Jack. The one thing that I really like about the Meryl performance here, and it's something that's highlighted like later on in her career, it comes up every so often, and it's always kind of one of my favorite Meryl elements, even if it doesn't hit as hard here as it does in later films, is that most of the big Meryl sequences in this film are musical sequences. Mm-hmm. She sings "He's Me Pal" in one of her opening sequences, and she plays the piano later on in the film. And they're both really like good moving sequences.
Yeah.
I wish there was a little bit more of it, but those elements are great. And I always like when Meryl gets to be musical.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is something that, like, because we've talked about Meryl before as we've been watching her performances up to this point. And I always feel like you said, this is one of those transformative Meryl performances where she's putting on the makeup and she's putting on the accent. And I always kind of personally prefer Meryl when she's a little bit more naturalistic.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's kind of why this one doesn't hit for me quite as well as some of the previous performances.
Yeah, that's fair, and I would generally agree with that. Just to drill down on the He's Me Pal scene, I think that's probably my favorite scene in the film, honestly, which, it comes pretty early, so it doesn't really hit that high very much for the next 2 hours. But,
Long movie.
yeah, over 2 hours. She starts off by singing on the stage, and she has a kind of shaky voice, a little pitchy, but she gives such a gusto to it, and she has so much charisma and kind of like this folksy energy that's really charming. She goes out into the audience, and they're just eating it up. She has these little flourishes in her voice, like when she goes up for those high notes. That's actually kind of sweet. Really nice moment, but then of course we get the reveal that this was all a fantasy, and in reality she finishes her song on the stage and the audience just could not care less, and she tries to put on like a brave face, but she's just disappointed that she doesn't have it anymore. But I think, it's smart that she doesn't play it as if like this is a really fragile moment for her, because Helen, I think how she plays her, she's a tough woman who's been through a lot and she's had to really survive. So it's like this is just another loss that she has to bear, another L for Helen, unfortunately.
Yeah, a lot of L's in the life of Helen, for sure.
Yes. So I like how when she mentions how if it gets really bad for her, she'll get in touch with her people, like her family, who are well to do. And it's an interesting sort of contradiction in how she's in this very unfortunate state, but she may be too prideful to truly ask for their help. And it's the same thing when they're talking to their friends who have like that apartment that they might be staying at. And she can't help but to give this woman a piece of her mind. And she kind of ruins the whole thing for them in terms of staying with them. And she has this air of like wanting to keep it real and how she can't be phony. And I think it's just interesting to see her playing a character who can't help but get in her own way at times. Feels kind of a little bit like her Silkwood performance.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I wish she was in a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that's the issue compared to the other three that we've talked about so far, is that this doesn't really compare.
Yeah. We have the moment where she's in church and she's praying. She finds some money on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
She rents herself a room.
Yes.
And then she disappears until the end of the film.
Yeah, I do think that church scene is good for her, though. She's kind of like, feels like she's kind of making peace at a certain point, and like she's more or less ready to give up on life in a way. I like when she says to the saints or whoever she's talking to, I never betrayed anybody, and that's what counts. And it's like, that's a scene that could have been very rehearsed and sort of tailor-made to be her Oscar moment, but she does underplay it, and she has this great frankness about being like, you know what, people have called me a whore and a drunk and all these different things. Some say I have been living in sin with Francis, but, I have pride in the fact that I've been honest. I've been an honest kind of woman.
Yeah, she's been on hard times most of her life, but she still has principles and she still has a lot of faith in herself. And I think that's an essential part of the character.
Mm-hmm. I think some of the stuff where she starts to sort of ramble about her life story after that, just like talking to anyone out on the street, and fully seeming like she's in her own little world. I think that's a little self-conscious for me and a little hammy personally, just in the way that she is like really playing up that kind of like, oh, this woman has gone off the deep end sort of thing. You know, I didn't
Yeah,
particularly love that part of it.
right. I think it's like the scene in the street where like all of her stuff's getting tipped over, and it's just like,
Yes.
oh, well, I mean, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just a little much, I think. But also, I did want to note this nice scene of her like playing that piano at the hotel. I think it's like she sort of is finding this inner, not peace necessarily, but like an acceptance that this is my time to go. Things aren't going to be better for me. So I'm just going to sort of go out on my own terms. So when she does end up laying out all her stuff in the room as a kind of tribute to her life, I think that's really poignant stuff, you know, putting up the photo of her family and is kind of like arguing with her own reflection in the mirror about her alcoholism, almost like she's arguing for her own like absolution before she dies. I think that's really interesting and makes it seem like she's sort of arguing in her own mind and it is occasionally coming out in words. I think that's really, really subtly done from Meryl. And of course, she does end up dying in the room. I read a very interesting behind the scenes story where Meryl was apparently so convincing as a corpse that it kind of scared people on the set because she basically went into this like coma state essentially.
Oh no.
Even after they yelled cut, like she was still lying there. And I don't know. I appreciate her dedication, but at the same time, like it's not that serious. Right.
It's like we're at the point in her career where she's got so many nominations. She's already known as one of the biggest actresses of her time. You don't need to go that much farther with it. We know you can do anything, Meryl. You don't have to actively lean into dead acting.
Yeah, unfortunately there's not too much else we can talk about with this because even though she has like a solid amount of screen time, I personally think there's not really an argument you can make that she's a lead actress here. I think if you take out a vast majority of her scenes, the movie is more or less unaffected because it's about Jack and his story, his character.
Yep. I mean, like it is a little bit of a sidebar, but I do like the whole like half hour between when Meryl goes into the hotel room and when we find her at the very end of the film. That whole sequence with Jack Nicholson and Carol Baker, who's playing his wife or ex-wife.
Yeah, I think still wife, but never divorced. Yeah.
Yeah. That whole sequence is so interesting to see this man who's been out on hard times coming back to his family and coming back to Carol Baker and trying to make it work again. I think is really interesting. I like Carol Baker in this film. It's nice to see her.
Yeah.
You know.
Really
good. And maybe in a year where there weren't so many other really good supporting actress performances, because that category is pretty stacked in this particular year. Maybe she could have gotten in.
Yeah, that would have been nice. A very, very subtle performance, so I'm not too surprised that she didn't get in for it. But yeah, again, really nice to see her. I love how she kind of pops up in these movies, even in the 80s and 90s. She also showed up in The Game, briefly in The Game. So
yeah, I'm like, what? I know that lady. I remember when watching The Game. I'm like, she looks very familiar.
Yes. Yeah.
So
anyway, that's the Carol Baker hour. Yes.
Yep. Just a Carol Baker corner.
Meryl, you know, she's reliable. This is just not for me a performance that was calling to be nominated. She's putting in good work, but it does feel a little bit name checky to me.
Yeah, this is not one that people talk about. It's not even like from the 80s, because people remember Silkwood. They remember Even Out of Africa.
Everything else she did in the 80s. Yeah.
Yep. But this is kind of the one that's kind of a little bit of an afterthought.
Yeah, I think because it's kind of difficult to watch. Difficult to find, maybe. Yeah.
It's difficult to find. It's almost 2.5 hours, and it's not a terribly big showcase for her.
Yeah.
So Another Meryl nomination. Another one of many to come.
Yeah. This was 7, and she has 21 in total, so we're a third of the way there.
Hooray!
With Meryl, yes.
Making our way up the Meryl Streep progress bar.
Indeed. Okay, shall we move on to our winner?
Let's get started.
Yes. All right, Cher in Moonstruck. Here we have our winner, one of the most famous women in pop culture history. So we've talked before about singers who have transitioned into acting before on this show. People like Barbra Streisand, Diana Ross, and Cher is another icon who has dabbled in all different mediums, and I would say excelled in pretty much most of them. You know, there's a whole lot we can talk about with Cher. I don't want to get too bogged down in all of the details of her career, but to keep it somewhat brief, she was interested in show business from an early age and really looked up to actresses that we've talked about on the show, like Audrey Hepburn, Bette Davis, Katharine Hepburn, Marlene Dietrich. She did singing and acting even as a teen. She eventually met Sonny Bono, who became her husband and professional partner, where they performed as Sonny and Cher. They had a variety show on TV. They did get divorced, and she explored different genres of music, very popular through a lot of this, but eventually her popularity started to fade a bit, and she decided to seriously pursue acting, and she was in the stage mounting of Come Back to the Five and Dime, Jimmy Dean, Jimmy Dean, and then reprised her role in the film adaptation in 1982, and then she was in Silkwood, where she really cemented herself as a serious actress working with Meryl Streep, which we discussed a few weeks ago.
Beginning a long, decades-running friendship with Meryl Streep.
Yeah, but Cher was able to score an Oscar nomination there for supporting actress. After that, she had her first big starring role in the film Mask, which she should have been nominated for, but wasn't. And she showed up in her revenge dress at the Oscars, famously. And then here comes this huge 1987 for her, where she releases her first album in 5 years, and she comes out with 3 movies: Suspect, The Witches of Eastwick, and Moonstruck. And she was reluctant to take on Moonstruck at first, because she wanted to make sure she could convincingly play an Italian woman. But the director, Norman Jewison, convinced her, and she kind of used her clout, too, to cast Nicolas Cage as her co-star, even though that's not who the producers wanted. But let's talk Moonstruck. It's a romantic comedy about an Italian-American woman, Loretta, played by Cher, who is a widow, and she lives with her parents and grandfather. She gets engaged to a man named Johnny Camilleri, but he doesn't really ignite much passion in her. He goes off to Italy to be with his dying mother, and in the meantime, Loretta is tasked with convincing Johnny's brother Ronnie, played by Nick Cage, to come to their wedding. And they pretty quickly are attracted to each other, and they engage in an affair while Johnny is away, despite perhaps her better judgment. So let's talk our winner, Cher, Moonstruck. Thoughts on this pop culture icon, her music career, her acting career, her incredible presence, wherever you want to start with this. Moonstruck.
The only real relationship that I have with Cher is through film. I'm not someone that listens to a lot of Cher. I'm not someone that watched television programs that Cher was on, but Cher in Moonstruck is quintessential, I think. This film is like a top 5 all-time romantic comedy.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a great film, and I think I chose it as one of my favorite wins when we first introduced the show for a reason. Cher is so good in this movie. She is so full of life, and she's so funny. And she's so romantic, and it feels so naturalistic, you know. The idea that like she would have any doubts about doing this performance is kind of nuts, because it feels like this is a performance that was made for someone like Cher, you know. She is one of the all-time TV stars, one of the all-time musicians, one of the great actresses. She is truly one of the triple threats of the 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
So watching this film is always a treat. And watching this film in context with the year, it's not quite like a Star is Born moment because she's been working for so long at this point, but it really shows like her bona fides as a really great actress. So I think it's so much fun. And one of the things that I like the most about this film is that it is an ensemble movie. There's so many other great supporting performances here from her family, from Nick Cage, from Danny Aiello, but all of it really revolves around Cher. And anytime that Cher is on screen, it elevates the movie. So Moonstruck it's a great movie.
It's wonderful. And Cher is wonderful. For me, she is just one of those people who was always destined to be a star, no matter what avenue she chose. I think she has such control, especially in her voice, in her stage presence, and just a resilience, I think, that can be kind of inspiring to people. Her voice is obviously just one in a million. She has this great sort of put on a show energy that I really love. And it's remarkable that she's able to contain all that energy and play characters in Moonstruck or Silkwood or Mask that are much more down to earth and natural and believable. And I think what's sort of tricky about the Moonstruck performance is that she makes it look so easy. And she said that it was really fun and loose on the set, and you can sort of see that energy in the film. But sometimes it could take a lot of effort to get to that easy feeling place, and I think this is a great example of that.
Yeah, there's what I like about this particular film is that there's so much joy in this movie. There's so much, like, a lot of heart and a lot of love in this film, which is really good to see after watching films like Ironweed and Anna and Fatal Attraction.
Yeah.
These movies that kind of give you like an uneasy feeling.
Even
Or like
Broadcast
a
News at times has some dark moments.
Yeah. But this film is just like such a joy from start to finish,
Mm-hmm.
And besides Cher here, I think the John Patrick Shanley script is so pitch perfect here.
Mm-hmm.
It's so funny. The lines are so great, and the deliveries by Cher and Nick Cage, and especially for me, Vincent Gardenia and Olympia Dukakis. I mean, it's so impressive.
Yeah. It's SAG ensemble.
Yeah, it's giving SAG ensemble.
Exactly. Yes. And I mean, she's putting on this Italian accent that to me she doesn't come across as like some gross over the top stereotype. She's able to really integrate that really seamlessly with her natural charisma. And even when she's supposed to be playing a sort of like dowdy 37-year-old widow with grays in her hair, she's so easy to like and relate to. And I think because she's so comfortable in the role, it makes us comfortable in the audience and makes it feel like we could just sort of sit back and enjoy these performers doing their thing. And what I think is really interesting in her performance is how, even though she is kind of dressing down and she's a widow and she's in a relationship she's not all that invested in, there's no like pity party here. Like, she's very sure of herself and she isn't afraid of telling it like it is. And she makes it very clear what she wants. No shyness, no playing coy. Like her boyfriend in the beginning at first, before he is her fiance, saying he wants dessert at the restaurant. And she's like, what do you mean? You never get dessert. Like, just like no beating around the bush. Very direct, even in the way that he proposes to her. She's like, it's bad luck. The way a man proposes to a woman, he kneels down and that's it. And once he does it, she's like, yes, I will be your wife. And it's very much like, there, was that so hard?
Yeah. I love that whole scene at the Italian restaurant where she's like, where's the ring? And there's the other people that are at the tables around them like, you gotta have the ring, and all he has is this pinky ring.
Yeah.
It's so funny. And I wanna note again, just on like the deglam factor here, is like the thing that is a little bit different for me in watching this movie is that because like the first time I watched Moonstruck, I didn't really have a strong like prior relationship with Cher prior to seeing Moonstruck. That first interaction with Cher where she's got the grays and she's a not quite down on her luck, but she's not like the Bob Mackie sort of
Right.
big dress that people were so used to at the time. That for me is always kind of who Cher has been, is this kind of really down to earth, earthy sort of person. And she's kind of the same way in Silkwood too, which is another context that I have her in. So when she has her big transformation in the midway point of the film, it feels to me like so impactful, even for if other people, it's like, this is now the Cher that we know.
Yes, and now she transforms into Cher. Yes, right. That's fair. That's an interesting perspective.
Also, and another generally funny thing between this and Mamma Mia, I always kind of thought that Cher was Italian, but she's not. Right?
That's how convincing she is. No, she's Armenian. So she is that good, I guess. You know, she was able to convince you.
Yes, I've been convinced.
Yes. I think also her interactions feel so natural with like her father. I think that stuff is really funny, especially when he's like criticizing the ring and she's like, it's temporary.
Yeah.
You know? Also, her mother trying to make sure she doesn't love the guy, but that at least she likes him so he doesn't drive her crazy. And Loretta is just like very clear that, yeah, she doesn't love him. And you can already see that in like the kind of cold chemistry, I would say, that she has with Danny Aiello.
That's so matter of fact.
Yeah. So it feels truthful when she is saying that because we've already seen that, like, yeah, it doesn't seem like she really does love him. You know, she's already kind of laid the groundwork in that first restaurant scene.
Yeah.
But yeah, all the stuff with her parents feels very lived in and like they do have a true history. Like this could easily be Cher's parents.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when Johnny is calling from Italy, like even then she doesn't seem overtly sympathetic towards him in that
she doesn't seem too worried.
No.
About his mom. Which
very
is
practical.
Kind of funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She doesn't even offer much advice outside of like, don't stand in the sun without your hat.
Yeah.
And it kind of just stems from like him not really taking responsibility, I think, and letting his mother know that they're getting married. And there's just something kind of wishy-washy about him that, by contrast, we have Ronnie, Nick Cage, totally wearing his heart on his sleeve. And there's very little wishy-washiness to him. He feels deeply.
This is very much, I think, in the same way as Holly Hunter. This is a big Star is Born year sort of for Nick Cage between Moonstruck and Raising Arizona.
That's true. He did have Peggy Sue Got Married the year before, so this is kind of his era of breaking through. But yeah. This as like a leading romantic star, for sure. This is the year.
Yeah. And what a entrance Nick Cage makes in this movie.
Yes. When he has his big outburst when she invites him to the wedding, obviously she is looking at him in a way that's interesting because it's not necessarily like, who is this freak, you know? Even though he seems kind of unstable at first, she does have this kind of kindness in her eyes, and I think it's because she's recognizing that he's in pain and has been through stuff. And his way of expressing it is very much like her own family, like very overt, big gestures. And I think that overtness is also of a sexual nature too. And I do think he has his own weird kind of sexual energy here that he doesn't have in some of his other roles.
Oh, just saying. And in addition to being a quintessential rom-com and I think an iconic New York film, this is certainly an iconic Italian film. You know, between Loretta Castorini and Ronnie Camerari, you know, working at the bakery, you know, it's a lot of fun.
Sure.
And the whole sequence in the apartment where they're arguing and then the attraction is like within minutes at that apartment. It's such a perfect rom-com scene.
Yeah, I think because they understand what each other has been through before. They've moved on from past relationships, and he has a lot of energy, but she really gives it right back to him, and all that energy between them becomes very carnal, and I love when he lifts her up to go have sex basically, and she's like, I don't care, take me to the bed. It's like,
Yeah,
this is inevitable. We both know this is happening, and she just has this great sense of humor, and I don't know, it just feels like other actresses would maybe have to work a little harder to really communicate some of that, but she just feels so easy and natural in this role. Like she just has this innate sort of irony that's like self-deprecating in a
yeah,
way that I think is refreshing for people in 1987 who are very well versed in who Cher is. She's this iconic, very rich woman by this point, but she is very relatable here, you know?
yeah. And you're right. Like the performance here doesn't feel forced in any way. It feels so like effortless and lived in by
Mhm.
Cher. I think that's why it's so impressive to me. And it's in the moment right after he takes her to bed that we get probably the most famous moment of the film.
Yes. Snap out of it.
Everyone loves it. We love
Mhm.
watching it. It's great to see. When it happened in the movie, I shook my fists in the air and I was like, "Whoa, whoa! This is it."
Yeah, because that's after him saying that I'm in love with you, and it's just very like mopey and doing his Nick Cage thing,
Yep,
and him
yep.
giving her
It's
giving
been
him
half a day.
yes, and she gives him the double slap, and saying that line. It's incredible.
Mhm.
The opera scene, I think, is also really good. The glamour, the elegance, her single tear as she's watching the performance, and they're holding hands, and they have this intense look that they share.
The tear during the opera scene is such an incredible image
Hmm.
because at this point she's been glammed up and she looks more like the Cher that people are familiar with, and to see that one tear on her face as she like really starts to get into this sort of not quite glamorous but this more exciting sort of lifestyle outside of what she would have gotten in like a humdrum life with a
With
Johnny.
Johnny, right?
It's so exciting for her.
Yeah, and I think it's the kind of passion and emotion that she wants for her life. So that's a really nice moment. And of course, she also catches her father at the opera with his mistress, and they're both kind of like outraged with each other, but they come to this mutual agreement to like pretend they never saw each other. But I do think her disappointment there is really palpable, especially because she already had, that conversation with her mother who had said that, your father is cheating on me. So it's like her suspicions were confirmed, even if she didn't want to believe it. Again, it's like those little tiny moments that register that look a lot easier than maybe they actually are.
Right, yeah.
And I think their argument outside of his apartment is another strong showcase for her, where she's kind of thinking out loud about how she's a rational person and she has to say no to him at this point because she's marrying his brother, and that's that. And she wants everything to be safe and easy again. And he's kind of saying, like, you know what? Like, we're on this planet to be messy and fall in love with the wrong people, and there's no use trying to be perfect. And all she's doing is listening to that. But she's so luminous in that moment, and she's clearly falling in love with him, even though she has, her own pride. But it's like he's giving her permission to give in to her instincts that they should be together, and she just communicates so much in her eyes.
Yeah, that scene there and like the dynamic between her and Nicolas Cage is like so palpable and so exciting and fun to watch. Like I really like the two of them together in this film.
Yeah, they seem like an odd match on paper, but weirdly work together.
And I love how she advocated for him to be in the role,
Yeah.
I don't know who they wanted to have in the role before they got Nicolas Cage, but I feel like getting him here is the absolute right choice.
Yeah, for sure. you know, there's a lot of discussion in this film about relationships and her mother asking, why do men chase women and all this stuff, and trying to find the proper way of like conducting yourself in relationships. But it sort of just comes down to not being afraid to make mistakes, and life is complicated, so we might as well be honest with each other. And I do think Cher in her performance does represent that kind of growing into herself and being with someone who keeps her honest and can kind of make life exciting and worth living for her rather than settle.
It's one of, I think, one of our favorite genres of films, and that is, of course, movies about a woman self-actualizing.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, this isn't one that I would normally think of in that genre, but it does really kind of become that when you think about it.
Yeah.
And we have that screwball energy of the final scene, which I love, where everyone's come together at the kitchen table, and all that awkwardness of that is so perfect. All her reactions to like the madness going on around her, and just like burying her head in embarrassment at certain things that are said. And then Johnny shows up and he breaks it off because basically he's still hung up on his mother. He has mommy issues. And
Yep.
she just lands that punchline so well, where she's like, in time you'll drop dead and I'll come to your funeral in a red dress.
It's so great.
Yeah.
And then she Ronnie asks Loretta to marry him, and then she gets the ring from Johnny.
Yes.
It's so funny.
Great comedy of errors. Yeah, and her mother asking if she loves him, and I love how she doesn't break eye contact with Ronnie, and she just says, "Oh my, I love him something awful." And of course,
and then she
Olympia
goes,
Dukakis is like, "Well, that's too bad."
Oh God, that's too bad.
Yeah.
It's I wanted just another quick sidebar for this film, this particular sequence here. I just want to say, I think you might have noted it while we were watching it the other day, but the sequence at the table that morning with Vincent Gardenia and Olympia Dukakis, where she confronts him about the affair, is an amazing sequence, and absolutely the reason why she won an Academy Award for this film.
When she says "Ti amo," I think that's just a really sweet moment. Yeah,
I know.
And she has tears in her eyes. One of my favorite supporting actress wins ever. Olympia Dukakis.
Yeah, absolutely perfect. She like Vincent Gardenia knows that he's done wrong, and she gets exactly what she wants out of that exchange, where she's like, "You're done. It's over. That's done." It's such a great ending for that particular thread of the film.
Yeah. Moonstruck is a movie I wish that I could live inside.
You wanna spend time at that dinner table, hanging out with those people. I think you would have a great time.
Yeah, go to that restaurant. Hang
Yeah,
out with John Mahoney.
hang out with that one waiter at the restaurant. That's just like a little guy who really loves the people that he's serving at the restaurant.
Yeah, it's just cozy cinema. Love this movie.
Love it, and love Cher in it.
For sure. Well, let's talk why we think Cher was our winner. Let's talk about this Oscar race. So Cher won the Golden Globe for Comedy Musical, as well as the Kansas City Critics Award. Glenn Close was a Golden Globe nominee, and here's something new. She won the People's Choice Award for Favorite Movie Actress. Glenn Close.
Is this the first year of People's Choice?
I don't think so, but
okay. But she won.
Yep, the People's Champion here. Holly Hunter was the big critics' fave. She won the New York Film Critics, the Los Angeles Film Critics, the National Board of Review, and the Boston Film Critics, and she was a Golden Globe nominee. Sally Kirkland won the Golden Globe for drama, and she won the Independent Spirit Award, and she won the Los Angeles Film Critics Award in a tie with Holly Hunter. And as we said, Meryl Streep was not nominated anywhere else outside of the Oscars. Once again, one of the clearest fifth places. Just like last week when we talked about Jane Fonda in The Morning After, very clear fifth place. But anyway, this is where we can also talk about the grassroots campaign that Sally Kirkland took on.
Boots on the ground.
Yes, pounding the pavement. So Anna was this obviously low budget independent film and was not going to get the kind of campaign of Cher or Glenn Close or Holly Hunter. So she decided to advocate for herself and did interviews with literally anyone who was willing to go on the record with her. She also wrote letters to members of the Academy to be considered, and she got Shelley Winters to help her by making calls to voters. She went all out, and she obviously got the attention of critics, like I mentioned, and the Golden Globes, and she got that Oscar nomination, after which she continued to aggressively campaign, obviously. There's a quote that I really love from Inside Oscar. She said, if she won, and I quote, "I will be the happiest woman in the world, and my belief in God will be reaffirmed."
That's such a perfect response. It is very much not in like a sinister sense, but it's very much an encapsulation of I am not going to be ignored, Academy.
Yes, she put herself out there. She also said that Liza Minnelli had gotten her a butterfly pin that she had worn on the night that she won for Cabaret and hoped that it would bring her good luck. But I'm just going to say that, like, if Twitter was around in like 1987, 1988 and like tracking this race, the discourse around Sally Kirkland's campaign would have been fascinating. But anyway, from what I could tell, this was a pretty strong race, even though most of the predictions I saw had kind of agreed that Cher is probably going to win this. You know, Holly Hunter had the critics on her side. Sally Kirkland had her campaign, had a lot of friends in the Academy. Glenn Close was kind of this populist pick. Meryl was also there. So why do we think
was there as well.
So why do we think Cher was our winner?
I think a big part of the reason why Cher wins, beyond just kind of being a name, it's a really arresting performance. It's just so well done. Mm-hmm. And I think people in the Academy like the performance and like the character. I think even though, Glenn Close was in the big blockbuster of the year, I think people might have had a hard time voting for her character to be an Academy Award winner. I think Holly Hunter is an ingenue here, basically. This is her first nomination. So there could have been a sense of like, we really like her here. We like her performance, but maybe it's a little bit too early to give her one right now. Perhaps something of that note. Meryl, they don't vote for because they didn't even expect this to show up. And I think Sally Kirkland is probably on the bubble here because she's been around for a long time. She's been working a lot, but she's not like a big name like the other people. Plus, it's an independent film, so it doesn't have a lot of backing with the studios, which I'm sure they're more likely to go with. I think there's a lot of confluences with everything that Cher has going for her here that really pushes her over the edge.
Yeah, I think Cher's win comes down to a lot of things. I agree that, like, sorry to keep repeating myself in this 80s season, but she's playing a very easy to like character, which I think is, first of all, primary reason why Glenn loses. You know, I think Cher had pretty much 100% name recognition and has now at this point proven herself with Silkwood and Mask, and she just had this banner year in 1987, leading 3 movies, releasing a comeback album even. You know, she proved that she was here to stay and she was a serious actress. And I think it's also easy to look at Moonstruck and Broadcast News and wonder if there may be a bit of splitting into camps between these two, like, you know, rom-com kinds of films. Based on the results, it's pretty obvious that Academy voters vastly preferred Moonstruck, which not only won Best Actress, but Supporting Actress and Original Screenplay. The thing with this, though, is that I read that Holly Hunter's chances may have been affected by the fact that she was doing a play during the Oscar campaign and she did not commit to doing interviews. So she more or less snubbed the press for a long stretch of the season. I do think a willingness to play the game really helps, and Cher is like, you know, she has decades of media training and is just this entity unto herself at this point.
It's always a little tough, well, maybe not tough, but it's always odd to get into the politics of this portion of the acting process.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're a new face in the crowd, you do need to really put yourself out there if this is something that you want. If Holly Hunter isn't doing press at this time, it's tough for her to really put herself over a name like Cher,
Right.
you know? Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. And with Sally, I think she did have strong support from her friends in the Academy and probably others maybe who wanted a more serious option in this category, perhaps. But Anna was so small that it maybe couldn't compete with something like Moonstruck, obviously. So everything kind of combined for Cher. She is who she is. She's proving once again that she can be a serious actress. She's in a movie that they fell head over heels for, and it's an easy character to love. It's
Yeah.
That's kind of the perfect formula for Best Actress, ultimately. And she gave a really lovely speech. I love her final line where she was like, "I don't think that this means that I'm somebody, but I guess I'm on my way." I think that's a really nice
It's a
sentiment,
really great moment, and she gets her Oscar from Paul Newman,
right?
which is always great to see. At this in particular is kind of funny, just in the context of like Paul Newman had not been available to be at the previous two Oscar years because he's always off doing something else. But he is able to be here for what I think is a pretty iconic Oscar moment.
For sure. She shouts out Meryl Streep. She calls her Mary Louise Streep. That's really nice. Very nice personal moment. Also, I know people are going to want me to mention the reactions from Sally Kirkland during this whole presentation. When her name is called and the nomination part of the presentation, she looks like she is jumping out of her skin. She is extremely nervous. I just find it very endearing that is like, she's not going to be humble about this. She really wanted this and she could win. Like, I'm sure she had a lot of people talking to her saying that they voted for her. So I think she was really, really nervous. And then when they do announce Cher, it looks like she kind of rolls her eyes. I'm not sure if that's exactly what's happening, but she does smile after that and she puts on a brave face. So
I think it's entirely possible that if they had announced Sally Kirkland's name for Best Actress, she might have passed out.
yes.
And as other people have noted before, when they're doing the intro to the nominees and they cut to Sally Kirkland, she does look 1-to-1 like Kristen Wiig. So
Yes.
I'm waiting with bated breath for the Anna remake with Kristen Wiig.
Wow. That would be incredible. I think she would love doing a movie like that, knowing her
Yeah, I
taste.
think so too. I think
Yep.
we should do a Anna remake with Kristen Wiig, and then we should nominate Kristen Wiig for Best Actress.
Love it. Yeah. A few other notes from Inside Oscar I want to just mention. Sally Kirkland said that, she put on a brave face and she was talking in the after party about how she had future projects she had lined up already, including one where she said it was a potential award-winning part. Didn't really pan out, unfortunately, but one quote that really did make me cringe a little, broke my heart a little, was this quote from Glenn. So she was congratulated after the fact just for getting, 4 nominations already in her career. And Glenn's reply was, "Maybe someday I might actually win."
Oh, it's rough because we're here almost 40 years later and
Yeah,
not quite there yet.
not quite there yet. She's wanted it for a while. I don't know what else to say,
Yep. Well,
It's been denied of her.
we'll hear about that a few more times
Yes,
during the series.
certainly.
I also do want to note that Gregory Peck and Audrey Hepburn were at this particular ceremony
Yeah.
presenting, and at the after party at the ceremony, Cher was able to meet with Audrey Hepburn, who
Oh,
told
yeah.
her that she wanted Cher to win. And to get an endorsement like that from Audrey Hepburn,
One of
of
her
all
idols.
people of all people in Hollywood, I think is really an affirmation of all of the hard work that she put in as
Mm-hmm.
an actor. So I think this day, this night in Cher's life is really like a culmination for her.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
really is. Yes. I feel like Audrey Hepburn was a Moonstruck voter.
Oh, absolutely.
Just
I think
saying.
she was very happy when it won a screenplay.
Yes. All right. Shall we get to these Twitter questions? I think this is a new record for a number of questions I got. Not surprised considering what this lineup is and the ladies involved here. So, might not get to all of them, but we'll do our best. Okay, Baby Clyde. Let's start off with Baby Clyde, who said, "Is Cher winning an Oscar the greatest event in entertainment history?"
I don't know if it's the greatest event in entertainment history, but I would say that it is one of the best Oscar moments and probably the best Oscar moment of the 80s.
Hmm. Yeah, it's such a moment. I wish I could have lived through it just to see it happen live. It just feels like this convergence that I do enjoy seeing sometimes when it's like a lot of different areas of the entertainment business are just very excited to see this one person succeed.
What it's such a bizarre analogy, but it's like that moment in Hercules when all the planets align at that one moment. It's like
Yeah,
everything is just right at that right perfect moment for Cher.
exactly. Yeah, I like that. Jamie said, "Does Moonstruck count as a case of movie star make under when a la Theron or Kidman, otherwise known as the D-glam?"
I honestly am going to say no, because if you're comparing the D glam of Cher to the D glam of Charlize Theron and Monster, it's like,
Not quite that.
it's not quite that. I guess in the sense of, again, it's such a different context for me because this is kind of my relationship with Cher, is seeing her in these movies like this.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have a lot of context for it. So I don't know if you can speak on whether or not this is a big sort of de-glam thing for Cher.
It's definitely not to that extent, but she does dress down enough for most of the film that it does sort of feel like a precursor maybe to that kind of Best Actress win. But no, it's definitely not like transformational makeup moment, which we're still plagued with these days with people like
Yeah.
Brendan Fraser.
Yep.
But
Yep.
anyway, Dark Shaka said, "If Cher had won for Silkwood, would she triumph here as well?" I'm going to say no.
Wow. I think I'm almost kind of inclined to agree a little bit in that sense, because I think if they give Cher an award for Silkwood, that is them saying, "You've arrived as an actress. You have our respect and our admiration, and we think that you're really at the top of your game in an acting sense." And
Yeah,
then that's the case, maybe they really don't give it to her for Moonstruck.
not as much urgency, perhaps, to do that.
Right. I really don't think they would want to give Cher two Oscars so close together,
Yeah,
you know.
probably not. It's possible, considering you know, I think
Yeah,
she,
considering what they did for Sally Field, where she got
yeah,
Oscars
exactly.
like so close together,
Hmm.
that it is potential that the performance is so undeniable. But I
Yeah.
think giving her one just a few years earlier would maybe lessen how big of an impact this one has.
Greg Creeman said, "I will have my gay card revoked for this, but I'm not a Cher fan and don't like Moonstruck. In my opinion, she's the weakest of the five. Glenn created an iconic character and should have won. Did Cher win because the Academy thought it would be fun to give an Oscar to Cher, the image?"
I don't think the Academy voters, the actors of the Academy, gave Cher the person. I don't think they gave Cher the icon an Academy Award. I think they gave Cher the actress an Academy Award.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's hard to separate someone's public image from the voting. I don't think this works in a vacuum necessarily. I think the appeal of it is her proving herself in that sense, but I don't think they did it as a bit to just be like, we're going to give Cher an Oscar. Wouldn't that be fun? I think
Yeah, I
they
think
considered her the best of the category. If I don't
yep.
know if that's naive to say, but
They I think they gave her the Academy Award because she gave the best performance
there
to
you go.
them.
To them, right. The Ghost of Glenda, Miss Jackson, If You Nasty, said, "Where does Cher rank as your most quotable Best Actress winning performances for a snap out of it?"
I don't know if it's like the iconic line, but I think it is an iconic line.
Mm-hmm. I'd say
I
very
don't know.
high.
Yeah, I don't know where I personally would rank it in terms of iconic actress quotes, but it's pretty up there.
Yeah. If you think about, like, if you're doing a Best Actress montage, that is the clip that you're going to use for Cher in
Yep.
Moonstruck.
Yep.
So, in that sense,
When you're doing montages of 80 years, 90 years at the Oscars, this clip probably shows up.
yes. Chels said, "What other nominations would you have given Cher?"
That's a
Obviously,
question
Mask.
for yeah, because you just watched Mask, a film
Yeah.
that was famously not nominated.
Mm-hmm. I also just watched Mermaids a few weeks ago, which was her follow-up to Moonstruck, and she's pretty good in that. Sort of overshadowed by Winona Ryder, but really good Cher performance. I'm going to throw out Burlesque as a supporting actress. You haven't seen The Last of Me.
I forget. They didn't nominate Did they nominate the song?
No, they did not.
And they should have.
They should have. And
They
Diane
should
Warren
have.
would have an Oscar if they did.
Yeah,
my take.
And then she would probably still be campaigning anyway, because as we all know, now that she has her honorary, she still wants one because you can never have too many.
She wants the competitive one, I think.
Yeah.
Matt Duffy said Sally Field, Jane Fonda, Liza Minnelli, and Meryl were considered for the part of Loretta in Moonstruck. If cast, would any of them have won, or was Cher just perfect casting?
Okay, so I figured this out for myself personally. So for me personally, I'm going to say Sally Field, no. I don't think Sally Field works in this role, only because I think, and this is like a weird reason for me, I think she's a little too short. I think there's a lot of dynamic between
she could do
Cher...
Jane Craig in Broadcast News.
She could do Jane Craig in Broadcast News,
would be
but
better,
I don't think she could do Loretta in Moonstruck.
Yeah.
Jane Fonda, maybe. I'm not sure about Jane Fonda here. I don't know if it's her right frequency.
No.
I think she'd probably have to work for it more.
Yeah.
I wrote down, I think I would have liked to see Liza do Moonstruck. I think that
probably
would be
the best
fun.
of these. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I think that would have been an interesting permutation. And a Meryl, no. This is not a Meryl thing.
No. Honestly, I don't think any of them would have won if they were in the role. I think Cher was perfect casting.
Yeah, Cher is, of all of those options just listed, the best option is Cher.
Yeah. Christoph said, would you rather see Cher play Loretta Lynn or Sissy Spacek play Loretta Castorini? And which of the two characters would you rather see Loretta Young play? Christoph being clever. Neither make any sense to play each other, to be honest. As far as Loretta Young, though, probably Loretta Lynn between the two. But, like, I don't want to mess with history here.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with that one. I couldn't remember who Loretta Young was, and then I remembered that she was in Come to the Stable.
She sure was. She was not playing tennis. Oh, that was the other one. That was
so unfortunate.
Yep.
Okay.
Miles McHale said, recast Cher in a classic Hollywood comedy or drama. I have a good Best Actress winning role for her. Mildred Pierce.
Ooh, that's an interesting role there.
Mm-hmm.
I like that one. I wonder how Cher would have been in one of the Katharine Hepburn roles. I would maybe like to have seen her with Cary Grant in a Bringing Up Baby. That would have been kind of fun. Transport Cher back in time. I think that would have been interesting.
Yeah. Jordan said, which Best Actress winning character would you most want to see deliver a snap out of it slap to their male co-star?
The first thing that I thought of, that I'm not even sure if it maybe kind of happened or not, is Shirley MacLaine in Terms of Endearment should have given a good snap out of it slap to Jack Nicholson.
That would have been very funny. What I went with here is somewhat of a similar energy of movie star as Julia Roberts and Erin Brockovich.
To Aaron Eckhart.
I guess she would slap Aaron Eckhart. I don't think she would slap Albert Finney. That would be disrespectful. But
no, please don't slap Albert Finney. He doesn't deserve it.
Yeah.
He's just trying to do his best.
We get a scene of Aaron Eckhart whining about how she's always working, and she's like, snap out of it. I think that would be good. Yep.
Yep. And then that would only increase her stock more in the movie.
Yep. Okay, so both Matt Stillman and Miles McHale noted that Fatal Attraction wouldn't have been as big of a hit as it was if they'd kept the original Glenn Close character ending.
I think based on what we kind of talked about while we were doing the Fatal Attraction segment, I'm honestly kind of inclined to say no. I think audiences really wanted that big Hollywood ending.
Yeah.
And I think it wouldn't have been a blockbuster without it, unfortunately.
It would have still gotten the box office numbers for like the first few weeks, but it probably wouldn't have the word of mouth if that original ending was kept. I'll say that.
Yep. Yeah, I agree.
Bruno said, was Glenn Close's performance too villainous for her to win? What is it about the Academy that rewards male actors who play antagonistic roles more than female actors who play the same?
It's your basic garden variety misogyny. It's just them being like, we're totally tolerant of men being bad because men have to do so much stuff in the world in order to get ahead, and it's just natural for men to have to overpower people. But when a woman does it, it's too scary and it's really unsettling for us. And in most circumstances, we cannot award it. So I think that's really just what it kind of boils down to.
Boils. Like that.
Oh, the pun. I didn't even intentionally do that, but yes. I'm very proud of myself.
Yes, I think that was all perfectly said. Completely agree with that. Sexism, double standards. It's been that way for decades. As we know, Rosamund Pike can attest, Carey Mulligan can attest, Joey Gentili said, as we know, Glenn's nomination was the win. Not critics, not a single voting bloc had her winning anything, so why is she the fan fave to win here while not taking home a single win all season? Well, it's a little bit like what we just talked about in the sense that I do think the performance has just aged better than it maybe was even received at the time, perhaps.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think Fatal Attraction, I think more than any other movie in this particular lineup, is such a remembered performance by just the populace at large from the 80s. So when people look at this year and they see Glenn Close and Fatal Attraction they're like, that's the one I remember. Even over Cher in some senses for Moonstruck here.
Yeah.
So I think that's why when people look, when the average person would look at this lineup, they would recognize that performance, which I think is why it's kind of the fan favorite here.
Yeah. Chels has her hot girl question here. Hot girl shit. Are Glenn, Cher, and Holly three of our hottest hot girls?
I think they're all hot girls to a certain extent. In terms of a hot girl shit rating for those particular three, I'll probably go Holly Hunter number 3, Glenn Close number 2, and Cher number 1.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Cher has the most hot girl energy, especially that one scene that's like, it's not really dwelled upon, but like when she has her incredible Cher hair that's blown out to here, and she's just walking in the street, just like kicking stuff. That's hot girl shit to me.
Yeah, it's like the early morning, and she's kicking a can down the road. I'm like,
yeah,
if I saw that lady on the street, I'd be like, that lady is cool as hell.
Yeah, and hot as hell. Rob Montoya and Miles McHale both want to know what would have happened here if Deborah Winger had been cast as Jane in broadcast news instead of Holly Hunter, and what would have happened in this race. I think Cher probably still would have won.
Cher still would have won. I think Deborah still probably would have been nominated.
Yeah.
But like we talked about during the segment, I don't know if the film is as good with Deborah Winger in this particular role.
Maybe not.
So, yeah.
I might argue that she could have actually come closer to winning if she were in the role, just because of the momentum from Terms of Endearment,
Yeah.
They knew her much more than Holly Hunter, but yeah, probably nothing much changed.
Not enough to put her over the top.
Yeah. Jeremy Kaplan said, perhaps this was Holly Hunter's Welcome to the Club nomination, but it's still a fantastic performance. If she had already been nominated previously for something else, do you think she could have won here?
I'm gonna say no. again here, because even if she is a fresh nominee here, I don't know if one other nomination is enough to put her over the edge. It might have bumped her up like a space or two.
Yeah.
But still not enough to secure a win.
Yeah, she would have come closer, but again, wouldn't change. The Ghost of Glenda Miss Jackson If You Nasty. Who would win in a news showrunner off? Holly in broadcast news or Faye Dunaway in network?
I think there's a pretty definitive answer to this one here. And I think it's Faye Dunaway in network, because Holly Hunter is a very good news producer. And she has a lot of integrity and morals, and she really knows how to produce a good news segment. But Faye Dunaway in network is like a killer. She has she has the bloodthirsty instinct to cut whoever. And if the two were somehow like working in the same news station, she would, I think, personally eat Holly Hunter for lunch.
Yeah, it's a tricky question because I don't know exactly what the competition is here. I would definitely trust Holly to keep everything on rails, and keep it honest. But I do think that like Faye Dunaway as Diana Christensen in Network is just one of those characters who would like survive an apocalypse and still be going.
Yep.
She is just like this unstoppable force.
Mm-hmm.
So, and ultimately her character feels like it's more the future of news programming.
Yeah. That is such
even though it's earlier.
Yeah, that's crazy. Is that like network is like almost a decade prior to broadcast news, but feels more in line with what would happen to news than broadcast news.
Yep, exactly. Bleak. Casey Chapman said, has anyone ever wanted the win more than Sally Kirkland? Serious question. And if so, who and how?
I think there have been actresses that wanted the win more than Sally Kirkland. And I mean, like, this is a kind of not to poke a sore spot for you, but I think there are very few instances of me seeing someone want a win more than Glenn Close in The Year of the Wife.
Yep. And that is, unfortunately, an all-time losing reaction face.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately.
I
would also say, to open it up to more than just actresses, Diane Warren. We just mentioned her,
No one has wanted an award more than Diane Warren.
Yep. Glorfindel of Gondolin said, would you please discuss Sally Kirkland's campaign for Anna as it relates to the recent campaign for Andrea Riseborough's performance in To Leslie? Superficially, there appear to be many similarities between the two campaigns.
It does. The Andrea Riseborough thing definitely feels like not the predecessor, but whatever the other one is. It feels like the natural evolution of the Sally Kirkland campaign, where if the roles had been reversed and Anna was the one that had to promote itself like a couple years ago, or whenever the Andrea Riseborough nomination was.
Literally last year.
She would have been sending out screeners. People would have been Instagramming about hashtag Sally Kirkland. She would have held billboards up. She would have been going all out, I think.
Yeah, the campaigns are a little different, though, because Andrea Riseborough didn't really take control of her campaign in the way that Sally did. Like, that was the director of To Leslie and his wife, Mary McCormick, really just like recruiting a lot of their friends and trying to post about it on social media, trying to raise awareness. It's similar in terms of trying to sort of break into the, awards industrial complex and whatnot, but different in the sense that like the actresses involved. Andrea Riseborough was like, if you want to do the campaign, that's fine. That sort of thing.
That is true. She was not boots on the ground for that thing. That was other people stumping for her. Right. Whereas Sally Kirkland was absolutely knocking on doors.
Right, exactly. Andrew Carden said, what sort of career would Sally have had she triumphed here?
I don't know how much different it would have Ben for Sally Kirkland? What do you think?
I mean, probably a slightly better one, but I do think it is worth noting that, like, winning Best Actress is no guarantee of success. Like with Louise Fletcher or even Marlee Matlin, which we talked about last week, sometimes Hollywood just doesn't really know what to do with certain actresses, even after they get nominations and wins.
Right. And like another thing about it is that like Sally Kirkland feels to me like an actor's actor. She doesn't feel to me like a commercial person.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
I agree.
She is an Independent Spirit Award winner, which you know, feels to me like it's not like she's gonna be doing Lethal Weapon 2 or whatever. You know, I think she always was going to be an independent actor, even if she won an Oscar.
Joey Gentili said Sally Kirkland should have seen 2 more Oscar nominations in her career, one for The Haunted, if it were a theatrical release, the other in 2014 for Archaeology of a Woman. Do you think she deserved anywhere else in her resume? I have no memory of what I've seen of Sally Kirkland beyond Anna, but Joey, I know you're a big fan of Sally's. I'll take your word for it on those.
Well, this is my first time seeing Sally Kirkland, so this is all I have to go off of.
There you go. Andrew Carden said cast Sally in Best Actress nominated roles from the 90s, 2000s, and 2010s.
So I have Sally Kirkland as Annie Wilkes in Misery.
Excellent pick.
I think that's a good idea. I have Sally Kirkland as Sister Aloysius Bovere in Doubt. I think that one kind of fits because it's a little more stagey.
Yeah, I like that.
In a violent kind of terrifying performance, I have Sally Kirkland in August Osage County.
Yeah, I thought about that one as well. I actually have 3 different ones, but I do think all 3 of those would have been right in her wheelhouse. Mm-hmm. So here's what I went with for the 90s. She is like at least 10 years older than this person by this point, so I'm just kind of like not thinking too much about age.
We're age fudging a little bit.
Yeah, but I do think she could do it. Sharon Stone in Casino.
Ooh,
replacing her there.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be fun. And then for the 2000s, I have her replacing Ellen Burstyn in Requiem for a Dream.
Yep, that feels like a pitch perfect spot to put Sally Kirkland in.
Yeah, and Lord knows she would really go for it there.
Yeah.
And for the 2010s, I had fun with this one. Again, not sure about ages and whatnot, but I'm replacing Meryl Streep, not in August Osage County, but in Florence Foster Jenkins.
Oh no. Oh, I as someone who has not yet seen Florence Foster Jenkins, I have no idea how Sally Kirkland would do in that.
I think it would be campy as hell, and I think it would be more fun than what Meryl brings to it. Christoph said, are there any circumstances under which it is justifiable to vote for a performance to win, even although you haven't watched the film? So this is actually a reference to Jenna Rollins, who apparently told Sally Kirkland that she voted for her, even though she did not see Anna. So what do you think? Do you think it's justifiable to basically vote for your friend, even though you haven't seen the movie?
Well, I think you got into a real quagmire here where I feel like people kind of, especially maybe not so much in the Oscars, but definitely in the Emmys, I think there's so much just rubber stamping. People aren't watching everything, and they just they see a name and they just vote for it, even if they haven't watched whatever the performance is. In terms of the Oscars, I feel like you should watch the movies. It's not that much of a time commitment. It's not that long.
Especially compared to the Emmys.
Yeah. Altogether, you're talking about max 10 hours
for this category.
Yeah. So I think you should watch the movies. That's just my personal opinion. If you're going to vote for a movie, you should watch it.
Yeah, she wouldn't be the first to vote without seeing the performance first, and she probably won't be the last. I don't love it. I do think you should do your homework when you're voting on these things, not just in the Oscars, but just like real life voting, politics.
Yeah.
You should know what you're voting for.
Yeah.
Just as a general rule.
especially with something like the Oscars, where like there's not a lot of people that get to vote for this sort of thing. So
Exactly.
it kind of counts,
Yeah.
relatively speaking.
Brian Holder said, if Sally Kirkland, Melissa Leo, and Andrea Riseborough were in an all-topped build in the same acclaimed movie, which ones would get nominated and who would win?
If
Andrea
we're
Riseborough.
talking, yeah, if we're talking about currently, right now, if all of those three are in a movie top build, the answer is Andrea Riseborough.
I think so.
Yep.
And then probably Melissa Leo, perhaps. I don't know if Sally Kirkland. It depends on the performance, I think.
Right. Yeah.
So it's kind of impossible to say. Joey Gentili and Miles McHale both want to know, is Meryl actually supporting in Ironweed?
Meryl is absolutely supporting in Ironweed.
Yeah. I think she's a strong supporting. It doesn't feel like a co-lead situation to me. She's on her own path.
She's actually separate from Jack Nicholson in most of the movie. So.
Yep, exactly. Andrew Carden said, how did Meryl edge out Lillian Gish, Barbara Streisand, and Faye Dunaway, who were much more in the conversation? Was it just sheer name recognition?
I honestly think it was. I think it's just them being, considering the fact that Meryl doesn't really show up anywhere until here. I think there is just like, Meryl's here. Mm-hmm. We like her. We'll nominate her. It's definitely, like you said, the first of the nominations that's just Meryl.
Yep. Dustin Van has an interesting question. Which of Cher's pop hits would you like to hear Glenn Close and Meryl Streep, both singers in their own right, take on? I can just picture in my head Meryl singing Gypsies, Tramps, and Thieves for whatever reason. So we'll go with that for Meryl. For Glenn, she is going to sing You Haven't Seen the Last of Me from Burlesque, and it's directed at the Academy.
Yep, that's correct. I think if Glenn ever retires, I think before she officially hangs it up, she should just unprompted go onto stage at the Oscars and just sing that.
Wow.
And then there's a big standing ovation by the audience, and then they finally bring her an Oscar.
Wow. What a moment. Mr. Entertainment said, will we ever see another actress have a streak like Meryl had in the 80s?
No. That's for me a hard no, because
her streak is like into the 2010s.
Yeah. But not only that, but the idea of repeatedly nominating this woman for like 7 out of 10 years of a decade. I don't know if there's anybody that's getting nominated at that frequency. So I'm going to say no.
Yeah, there's a few that have had some kind of like brief hot streaks, like Susan Sarandon in the 90s, Judi Dench kind of in like the late 90s, early 2000s period. We had Jennifer Lawrence, of course, in the 2010s. Kind of Olivia Colman now, but like feels like that might be dropping off. But like, yeah, this many nominations in one decade, especially for her just like coming out of the gate with all of that. It's not like she's like a veteran, you know, she's just like racking up 7 nominations over the course of the first 10 years of her career.
Yeah.
Cody Derricks has an interesting thought experiment. Please map out the alternate timelines that happen if Glenn or Holly or Meryl wins this, parentheses, sorry, Sally.
This is one where you really have to do a lot of big galaxy braining here.
Yeah.
The one thing I can certainly say for sure is that if Glenn Close wins the Oscar for Fatal Attraction, there are several nominations later in her career that do not happen.
Like The Wife?
Like The Wife, like Hillbilly Elegy, maybe even Albert Nobbs.
So all of them.
Yeah.
Later
I think she gets nominated for Dangerous Liaisons, but that's probably it.
I do think she still gets in for Albert Nobbs because it's her passion project, but she was never winning for that. The Wife, I don't really think that happens. I don't even think Hillbilly Elegy comes about for her either. If Holly wins, probably Angela Bassett wins in 1993 for What's Love Got to Do with It.
And isn't that kind of great?
If Meryl wins, nothing changes.
Nothing changes. The timeline continues as it was.
Yep. Rob Montoya said, fast forward to 2023, recast all of these performances.
Okay, so I did my picks. There was another question here that asked to do this by nominees of the past decade. So I tried to stick with people that have been nominated. for
Oh,
an
okay.
Academy Award.
Mm-hmm.
So I have, in the Anna role, I have a Julianne Moore,
Oh, okay.
which I think
Interesting.
could be kind of interesting. I think she really has the capability, because she's shown in the past that capability to really like take it to the edge in terms of the desperation.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
We can just go back and forth with who we would cast for
yep,
each of them. I am very on the nose with this, and I said Andrea Riseborough
makes the most sense.
because feels like she almost could look like Sally Kirkland in Anna. You
Yep,
know,
she is an incredibly transformative actor.
yeah,
So I think she would show up to set and she would just look like Sally Kirkland.
pretty much. For let's do Moonstruck.
I think we both have the same one, right?
Yeah, we talked about this earlier. It's got
Yeah,
to be Lady Gaga.
it's obviously Lady Gaga. I don't think there's anyone
Mm-hmm.
else who could do it. And I think if Lady Gaga did Moonstruck, I think she could maybe win. I don't know.
Yeah, something like Moonstruck.
Yeah,
Yeah,
something Moonstruck-esque.
right.
She's got to lean into her comedic chops.
Mm-hmm. Let's do the Ironweed one because that feels like it was a struggle for me, but I landed on someone.
I just had to pull something out of a hat for this one. I have one
Okay.
that is Best Actress nominated and one that isn't. So for my Best Actress nominated one, I have Sally Hawkins.
Sure. Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
Yep.
But the other one that I thought of that I thought might be a good fit is Helena Bonham Carter.
Yeah, certainly. Sometimes some of her fashion, I think you could easily just like transport that to. Yeah, I could see it.
Yep.
I went with Tilda Swinton.
Oh, that's kind of interesting. I like that pick.
I feel like when I think about Meryl, sometimes I kind of think about Tilda Swinton with her ability to transform too.
Mm-hmm.
Let's do broadcast news. Who we got?
So, in the course of getting my broadcast news nomination, I did have to fill out the trio. So I do have all three roles picked out for broadcast news.
Uh-huh.
I do have Saoirse Ronan in the Holly Hunter role.
Love that.
I do have Adam Driver in the William Hurt role. And I have a toss-up for the Albert Brooks role between Jesse Plemons, which feels kind of like the sort of nebbishy kind of guy. But I also have Brian Tyree Henry, who I think would be interesting and like a contrasting sort of role there.
That's very smart. Good job. Yeah. I decided to go a little off the beaten path here with mine and pick an actress who is very much on the rise and is well regarded for her unique, quirky, spunky energy right now and is very hot. This would be kind of different, but I think could be really fun. Io Adebari.
Oh, that's such a great idea. That's
Yeah.
so perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you remake broadcast news and you cast Io Adebari, I think she could get nominated. That feels like such a that feels really in her pocket right now, and she's like so like blowing up right now. If she got a role like that, it would be so exciting. That's such a great idea.
I think that would really elevate her to a new level.
Yep.
And then let's talk Fatal Attraction here, and I'm not going to say Lizzie Kaplan because we're not going to acknowledge that TV remake.
Do you know what? It's so like a real, I don't even know how to explain it, but to say that like Fatal Attraction is such an iconic film that like over 30 years later, we can do a TV remake of Fatal Attraction, but also it kind of doesn't exist.
Yeah. Nobody watched it.
So bizarre.
Yep.
Anyway, I'm gonna give my pick for Fatal Attraction, and this is the one where I said it's a pick that would almost kind of scare me a little bit, and it's a Rooney Mara in Fatal Attraction.
Oh boy. Okay, I like that. I think that would be really fun for her to do. Be a little more extroverted, perhaps, with it.
Yep.
I went with someone who I know that scares you in particular because we've talked about it. And I think it's someone who is like not movie star, but is well regarded, and if she did this kind of role, it would also be a bit of a step up to her into the mainstream. Jessie Buckley.
Oh, as you know, Jessie Buckley, very scary for me.
Yes.
If I saw Jessie Buckley in a Fatal Attraction, it would not alleviate my fears of Jessie Buckley.
Yeah. But like, I could just see her tapping into that like really nervous kind of like scary energy. I don't know.
Yeah.
It just works for me.
But outside of that film where she played a singer, I don't remember what the name of it was. It came out a few years ago.
Wild Rose.
Outside of that film, anytime Jessie Buckley is on screen, she has such dark-sided energy that like a Fatal Attraction remake doesn't make sense for her.
Fair enough. Fun question. Yeah. Good. I'd like to see some of these remade. Doesn't have to be direct remakes, but something akin to those movies.
Yeah.
John T. said, the 1980s were the most sentimental decade with Oscar. Fonda, Hepburn, Amiche, Ashcroft, Newman, and Tandy all winning. If Lillian Gish or Bette Davis get in for Whales of August, do they stand a chance based off of give it to the legends mood, or was Cher unbeatable?
I'm going to say, if we take out Meryl Streep and Ironweed, and we put in Lillian Gish, I think Lillian Gish wins.
Yeah, Lillian Gish between the two would have definitely been in win contention. I haven't even seen the Whales of August, so I can't even say for certain. But yeah, that is like, for me, very much in the wheelhouse of an 80s type of win. And she is a legend. She's been working in film since the 1910s. So like, yeah, that would be hard to resist if she was in that category. Let's do some more recasting here. Joey Gentili said, recast these 80s Oscar talents and Karen Black in the roles above. Isabelle Adjani, Christine Lottie, Angelica Houston, Maggie Smith. Yes, this honestly feels like, for me, one combination. But I don't know if you would agree with that.
Let's see if we got the same combination, because it also feels to me like there's one scenario here.
Yeah, okay. Which do we do for Karen Black? I say Anna.
I said Karen Black and Anna. So, yep, that's correct.
Yep. Isabelle Adjani, I put in Fatal Attraction.
I put her in Broadcast News.
Oh, okay.
Maybe
one of the reasons I said her in Fatal Attraction because she was also wanted by some producers to do the role. So I figured that makes sense.
Yeah.
I have Christine Lottie in Broadcast News.
I have Christine Lottie in Fatal Attraction. Maybe it's just because of the hair.
Okay, fair enough. Angelica Houston is made for Moonstruck.
Yes. Yep. That even more than like Sally Field or Jane Fonda or Liza Minnelli. Angelica Houston feels like a natural replacement for Cher if Cher couldn't do it.
Yeah. And then Maggie Smith
just goes to Ironweed. Yep. Sorry, that's all we got left for you, Maggie Smith.
Sorry, Miss Maggie. Yep. Amar said, recast these ladies in the roles of these iconic villains. Nurse Ratched, Joan Crawford from Mommy Dearest, Catherine Trammell, which is Basic Instinct, Amy Dunn from Gone Girl, and Annie Wilkes, of course, from Misery.
This one to me also feels like one that kind of has a one natural scenario.
Okay.
Or did you have some different ones?
I don't know. We'll see.
Okay. I had Holly Hunter as Annie Wilkes.
As did I. Yes, that makes the most sense of those.
I had Glenn Close as Amy Dunn.
I have her as Nurse Ratched.
I have Cher as Catherine Trammell.
Absolutely. Totally. That's mine too.
I have Meryl Streep as Joan Crawford.
I have Meryl Streep as Amy Dunn.
Ooh, that's kind of fun.
But like before Meryl was Meryl.
Right, like
in her early years.
Early Meryl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For some reason I could just see her like driving down the highway and just saying that cool girl monologue and being so blasé about it. I could just see it from Meryl. Anyway, Sally Kirkland is Joan Crawford for me.
I have Sally Kirkland as Nurse Ratched.
Okay, that could work too. I think she probably would have auditioned for that, honestly.
She probably did.
Yeah. one more recasting one from Greg Adams. Cast the 5 actresses with the most nominations that you haven't gotten to yet in these 5 roles. Cate Blanchett, Judi Dench, Kate Winslet, Frances McDormand, and Amy Adams.
Okay, so I had some fun with this one, and I think there's one in particular here that feels like a little bit too much for me, but I'm gonna go ahead anyway.
Okay.
So I have Amy Adams on Broadcast News, just that same kind of peppy energy.
I have her in Moonstruck.
Oh, that's fun. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's different. I have Judi Dench in Ironweed because I didn't know where else to put her.
I do as well. Unfortunately. I mean, it has to be younger, Judi Dench, obviously, but yeah.
Yeah. I like this pick for me personally. I think I did a good idea. I have Kate Winslet in Anna.
Oh, wow. I have Kate Winslet in Fatal Attraction.
Ooh.
Which I think would be really scary.
Yeah. I just like the idea of there was that period in Kate Winslet's career where she was really working hard to get that award. Yeah. And I like the idea of her playing this actress that's struggling really hard. And the idea of like, you can very clearly see that this is someone who's very professional and who works really hard, but just can't catch a break. I think that would be an interesting role for Kate Winslet. I put Cate Blanchett in Moonstruck.
Okay. Can she play Italian? I don't know.
I don't know.
I have her in Anna.
Ah, that makes more sense.
She can do accents. I don't know. Mm-hmm. It's not a perfect fit, but makes the most sense of these for me.
Yeah.
Frances McDormand, did you say?
The last one I have is Frances McDormand in Fatal Attraction.
Dear God.
Yeah, that's why when I wrote it down, I told you this might be too scary. Just like a slightly younger Frances McDormand.
Well, I mean, she could have done it at this age in her career.
Yeah.
She's like a contemporary of Glenn Close. So I think, yeah.
Yeah, I think she more than anyone else I can really think of, Frances McDormand has the energy of someone you do not want to be mad at you.
That's very true. Don't want to piss her off.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I actually have her in Broadcast News.
Oh,
which
that's
is a different flavor of Frances,
vibe.
But
yep.
She has that kind of sense of humor, I think, and a go-getterness at times. Like, you can channel that, I think, in some of her Coen work.
Yeah.
Like Fargo, I think, she's kind of a go-getter in that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. A few more questions here. David Pusak said, the underrated Jennifer Jones appeared for the final time as an Oscar presenter this year. I don't think that's true. I think that might be the next year or the year before. Either way, which Best Actress winner would you love to see do so just one more time?
I would love in this coming up ceremony, I really would like to see Shirley MacLaine come out. I know we just saw her, I think, in a previous season of Only Murders on the Building, and she was in like one scene, and it was just very nice to see Shirley.
Yeah. Love Shirley. I would just love to see one last public appearance from Joanne Woodward. I don't know what state she's in right now, because she's been kind of a recluse for a while, but it would be nice to see her. Either way. Lila said, Anne Bancroft won the BAFTA for her performance in 84 Charing Cross Road, but she wasn't recognized anywhere else. Why no love for her and for the movie in general? I don't know. Some British films just don't cross over with American audiences, and this one definitely did not. I haven't actually seen it, so I can't really speak to it. Ben Roberts said, this was the year that one of the greatest comedies of all time, Overboard, was released. Do you think Goldie Hawn was more deserving of a nomination than anyone on this list?
Meryl Streep?
Hard to argue. Yeah. Okay, that's pretty much it for questions. So let's get to our final segment where we will reveal who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. I have no idea what you're going to say here, so very curious who you think it was of this group.
I'm taking out Meryl.
Yeah.
I'm taking out Glenn because of the reasons that we stated before, which is that I think the voters of the Academy would be reticent to award a win to a character that is as quote unquote villainous
Yeah.
as Glenn Close here,
Hmm.
especially when we have other people in this category. I think, personally, I think the runner up here is Holly Hunter and Broadcast News.
Hmm.
The film got a fair few amount of nominations. It's a likable performance from a bright young star.
Hmm.
And the reason why I put her over Sally Kirkland is because she really had to fight for that nomination. And I don't think the film appears anywhere else with any other nominations. So that's kind of my rationale here, going for Holly Hunter over Sally
Okay.
Kirkland.
I definitely agree with you that Meryl is out. Glenn is probably out as well for what we've said, even though she is, in a pop culture moment and in a Best Picture nominee. I just think there's no way the Academy was getting anywhere close to giving her a win for that, unfortunately, in 1987. So it does come down to Holly Hunter and Sally Kirkland for me. I'm going to go out on a limb with this and say I think the runner up was Sally Kirkland.
Wow.
Yeah.
That would have
And
been,
one
I
of,
think, a real phenomenal moment to see.
certainly. Yeah. I think she made it very clear that she wanted it. Holly Hunter was not available to anyone during this time. And so I just think that can sometimes make a difference. Anna is also a big, big dramatic showcase. And you compare it to Broadcast News, where I feel like, as great as Holly is in that movie, I don't know if it's like exactly what the Academy rewards in this category for as great as she is. And I think Sally Kirkland has a much more traditional dramatic performance that they really like. And I think people really got caught up in the narrative. Jenna Rollins voted for her without even seeing the movie.
I think
And
I think the thing that you really, and I think that's probably the thing that pushes it over the edge here, which is that especially at this time in Oscar history, they really like it if you want it.
yeah, yep. And so I think she had a decent amount of support from her friends, which she had a lot of friends by this point. She had worked with so many people, including A-listers like Robert De Niro, and Shelley Winters isn't really an A-lister, but certainly was, friendly with a lot of people. I just think she had a small insurgent amount of support, but I do think Cher was probably the easy winner from this group ultimately. That's my take. Well, my other question, of course, the final one, is who would you have voted for from this lineup?
I think I still would have voted for Cher. I would have voted for Cher to win
Okay.
because there's a lot of warmth to that performance and a lot of joy to that film, and it's so rewatchable, and it's like a nice warm bowl of soup, or like a nice warm plate of spaghetti.
Yeah,
And
that's amore.
I think people really recognize that during the year, and I
Hmm.
I just think it's an iconic win.
Yeah, it certainly is. I am very happy that Cher won her Oscar for this. She would not get my vote. My vote would go to Glenn Close for Fatal Attraction, and for the pretty much opposite reason of the warmth and, huggability of Cher and Moonstruck. There is a coldness and a very haunted quality to what Glenn Close brings to Fatal Attraction that I think is the epitome of what great acting can be in terms of elevating a two-dimensional character on the page to a very memorable three-dimensional human being. And so I think she, of all the performances here, elevated her film the most and has created so many pop culture moments that still, live on all these years later, that it would have been nice if she had won for this one.
Well, there we go.
Yeah.
I think it would have been nice if Glenn Close got her Oscar for this film.
Yes.
Because I think definitely of all of the performances that she's given over the years, this is the performance.
And I don't know if we'll ever get to that point again, at least not in Best Actress. Maybe supporting, who knows? We
Yeah.
shall see what the future holds. She is still active and working, and I'm excited to talk about her a little bit more on this show. So, Thank you so much for joining me. This was quite a deep dive, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it's dark outside.
Yes, we've been talking for quite a while.
Yes, this was a great time with some great films.
Yes. Well, tell people where they could find more of you on the internet.
I'm on Twitter at Sebastian Gronback. That's SEBASGRONBACK. That's it. I have a regular person job, so I don't have any writing anywhere or any clips to post. So if you want to see retweets of this show, follow my feed.
You're also on Letterboxd.
I'm also on Letterboxd. I don't know what my Letterboxd account name is, but if you search for me on Letterboxd, you can follow me there. I make a lot of lists. I log all the stuff that I watch and I leave star ratings. So if you want to follow me anywhere, and you could follow me on Letterboxd because I'm active on there every day.
Mm-hmm. That is where you're most active.
Yes.
Yes. Well, thank you all so much for listening. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson and the show's at Oscar Runner-Up on Twitter, Instagram at And the Runner-Up is. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you liked what you heard and want to hear more, go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup is, where you can hear a whole bunch of bonus episodes. In 2 weeks, we will be discussing the Best Actress lineup of 1988, where the nominees were Glenn Close in Dangerous Liaisons, Jodie Foster in The Accused, Melanie Griffith in Working Girl, Meryl Streep in A Cry in the Dark, and Sigourney Weaver in Gorillas in the Mist, with the winner being Jodie Foster. So with that, thanks again, Seb.
Thank you.
And I will bid you all adieu.